Centuries of careful academic study have mapped the origins of society, yet the geological record quietly harbors anomalies that defy standard chronology. Deep within undisturbed strata, carved stone structures and precise skeletal modifications suggest refined engineering long before recorded records allow. Silent monuments remain, defying conventional logic and forcing modern researchers to re-examine foundational assumptions about early human culture. At first light, the landscape of Joya de Cerén appears almost ordinary. Green vegetation stretches across the fertile plains of western El Salvador, while layers of volcanic soil quietly conceal the remains of an entire farming community frozen in a single, extraordinary moment. There are no towering pyramids, royal palaces, or monumental temples dominating the scene. Instead, modest homes, workshops, gardens, storage buildings, and narrow pathways reveal the rhythms of everyday life. It is precisely this simplicity that makes Joya de Cerén one of archaeology's most remarkable discoveries. Around AD 600, the nearby Loma Caldera volcano erupted with astonishing speed. Thick layers of volcanic ash swept over the village, sealing buildings, tools, crops, and personal belongings beneath several meters of volcanic deposits. Unlike many catastrophic eruptions, there is little evidence that the villagers themselves perished at the site. Household objects were left exactly where they had been used only moments before. Clay pots remained on shelves, farming tools rested against walls, and footprints seemed to fade into silence as the settlement disappeared beneath the ash. For archaeologists, the preservation is extraordinary. Comparisons are often made to Pompeii, yet Joya de Cerén offers something fundamentally different. Rather than preserving the lives of wealthy citizens or political elites, it captures the daily existence of ordinary farmers. Their kitchens, sleeping areas, storage rooms, and gardens provide an unusually complete picture of how common families lived, worked, and organized their community more than 14 centuries ago. Excavations have revealed cultivated fields containing manioc, maize, beans, chili peppers, and agave. Even the impressions of plants survived within the volcanic deposits, allowing researchers to reconstruct agricultural practices with remarkable precision. Structures built from wood, thatch, and earth, materials that normally decay within decades, remained preserved because the ash created an almost airtight protective layer. Each discovery offers another glimpse into routines that history rarely records. Yet, the site raises questions that extend beyond its exceptional preservation. Perhaps the most discussed mystery concerns the apparent absence of human remains. If the eruption arrived as rapidly as geological evidence suggests, how did nearly everyone escape? Scientists generally believe that earthquakes or smaller volcanic events may have provided enough warning for villagers to flee before the largest waves of ash arrived. This explanation fits many aspects of the evidence, but it remains difficult to reconstruct exactly how much time they had or where they ultimately went. Equally intriguing is what the villagers chose to leave behind. Valuable grinding stones, ceramic vessels, stored food, and personal possessions remained inside the buildings. Such discoveries suggest an evacuation carried out under intense urgency. People may have believed they would return within days, expecting the danger to pass as previous eruptions perhaps had. If so, they never came back. Some researchers have also considered whether social or religious factors influenced their response. In many Mesoamerican cultures, volcanoes were not viewed merely as geological features, but as powerful forces connected to divine authority. Did spiritual beliefs shape the villagers' decisions during those critical hours? Did ceremonies accompany their departure? Archaeological evidence provides only fragments, leaving much to interpretation. Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some suggest that the settlement may have been abandoned after unusual natural phenomena interpreted as supernatural warnings. Others propose that oral traditions describing sacred mountains preserve distant memories of disasters like the one that buried Joya de Cerén. Such ideas remain difficult to verify, yet they illustrate how dramatic events often become woven into cultural memory over generations. The discovery itself carries its own remarkable story. In 1976, construction work unexpectedly exposed buried structures, leading archaeologists to uncover an entire community preserved with astonishing detail. Every excavation continues to reveal subtle details of ordinary lives that rarely survive in the archaeological record. Rather than celebrating kings or military victories, Joya de Cerén preserves shared meals, careful farming, family routines, and quiet moments interrupted without warning. Standing among these reconstructed buildings today, the silence feels unusually personal. Every wall, every cooking vessel, and every abandoned pathway suggests lives paused rather than completed. The evidence tells us much about how these people lived, but far less about what they experienced during their final hours in the village. Somewhere beyond the preserved houses lies the unanswered chapter, where they fled, how they rebuilt their lives, and whether memories of this place survived long after the ash settled. While Joya de Cerén preserves a single community at the exact moment time stood still, other landscapes guard their history in a very different way. Instead of sealing the past beneath volcanic ash, they allow it to disappear beneath layers of living forest, where every generation of growth conceals another. Few places illustrate this more powerfully than the vast Amazon basin. From above, the Amazon appears endless. Rivers twist through an immense green canopy that stretches beyond the horizon, interrupted only by occasional clearings and winding tributaries. Beneath that dense vegetation lies a landscape that has challenged explorers, archaeologists, and historians for centuries. At first glance, the forest seems untouched by large-scale human activity, a wilderness that has remained largely unchanged since prehistoric times. Yet, over the past few decades, that assumption has steadily begun to shift. For much of modern history, scholars believed the Amazon could support only scattered villages. The rainforest's thin soils, frequent flooding, and demanding climate appeared unsuitable for dense populations or complex urban centers. Early European accounts describing extensive settlements along the great rivers were often dismissed as exaggerations, the imaginative observations of travelers encountering unfamiliar landscapes. Then, the evidence began to accumulate. Archaeologists uncovered vast networks of geometric earthworks, carefully engineered causeways, raised agricultural fields, canals, reservoirs, and clusters of settlements connected across remarkable distances. In several regions of Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, and neighboring parts of the Amazon, researchers found traces of sophisticated land management extending far beyond isolated villages. These discoveries suggested communities capable of organizing labor on an impressive scale. One of the most important clues emerged from the soil itself. Across large areas of the rainforest lies an unusually fertile black earth known as terra preta. Unlike the surrounding nutrient-poor soils, this rich layer contains charcoal, organic matter, pottery fragments, and other materials created through long-term human activity. Scientists generally agree that these soils were intentionally developed over centuries, transforming difficult ground into productive farmland. Rather than adapting passively to the forest, ancient inhabitants actively reshaped it. Satellite imagery and airborne LiDAR surveys have added another layer to the story. By penetrating the forest canopy with laser pulses, researchers have revealed extensive settlement patterns invisible from the ground. Circular plazas, defensive ditches, ceremonial platforms, and road systems emerge with remarkable clarity once the trees are digitally removed. Some discoveries extend for miles, suggesting carefully planned communities integrated into larger regional networks. Yet, important questions remain unanswered. How many people actually lived within these landscapes? Some estimates suggest populations reaching into the millions before European diseases devastated indigenous societies following first contact. Others argue for more modest numbers, cautioning that archaeological evidence remains incomplete and unevenly distributed across the enormous basin. The true scale of Amazonian civilization continues to be debated. Another enduring puzzle concerns the apparent disappearance of many of these settlements. Climate shifts, warfare, migration, epidemic disease, and environmental change have all been proposed as contributing factors. Most historians believe introduced diseases played a catastrophic role after European arrival, reducing populations so dramatically that abandoned cities were gradually reclaimed by vegetation. Within only a few generations, roads became forest trails, cultivated fields returned to woodland, and buildings constructed largely from wood slowly decayed into the earth. Still, not every question fits comfortably within established explanations. Some researchers have wondered whether many settlements remain undiscovered simply because the forest continues to conceal them. Every year, newly identified earthworks expand the known archaeological map of the Amazon. Regions once believed empty now reveal carefully organized landscapes shaped through centuries of human effort. It raises an intriguing possibility. How much remains concealed beneath areas that have never been systematically surveyed? Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative theories occasionally appear. Some propose that descriptions of legendary cities filled with wealth, recorded by early explorers, preserve distant memories of genuine urban centers rather than pure invention. Others suggest that traditions surrounding places such as the legendary city of Z may reflect fragmented recollections of real settlements later swallowed by the rainforest. While no definitive evidence has confirmed these narratives, each new archaeological discovery reminds researchers that long-dismissed historical accounts sometimes contain unexpected elements of truth. Standing within the Amazon today, surrounded by towering trees and the constant sound of insects and distant rivers, it is difficult to separate the natural landscape from the one shaped by countless generations before it. Beneath roots, vines, and layers of accumulated soil may rest plazas where communities gathered, roads once traveled daily, and homes whose outlines have yet to see daylight again. With every new survey revealing another fragment of this immense human story, one question quietly remains. How many chapters of the Amazon's past are still waiting beneath the forest canopy? As the Amazon reminds us that entire landscapes can conceal the remains of thriving societies, there are places where the evidence reaches even deeper into the human story. Long before cities, kingdoms, or written records, small communities were already experimenting with new ways of living together. One such place lies on the banks of the Euphrates, where the settlement of Jerf el-Ahmar offers an extraordinary glimpse into a turning point that still raises profound questions. Today, the site exists largely beneath the waters of the Tishrin Dam Reservoir in northern Syria. Before its inundation, archaeologists carried out intensive excavations, uncovering traces of a community that flourished around 9,500 to 8,700 BC during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. At first glance, the remains appear modest: circular buildings, stone foundations, storage areas, and carefully arranged communal spaces. Yet, beneath this apparent simplicity lies evidence of a society undergoing one of the greatest transformations in human history. The landscape surrounding Jerf el-Ahmar would have looked very different from the dense cities that would emerge thousands of years later. Rolling hills overlooked the Euphrates, while seasonal grasses and wild cereals covered the surrounding plains. Herds of gazelle moved across the countryside, and the river provided fish, water, and fertile ground. It was a world balanced between hunting and gathering on one hand, and the earliest experiments with cultivation on the other. This period marked an extraordinary transition. For countless generations, humans had lived primarily as mobile hunter-gatherers, following seasonal resources across vast territories. At Jerf, el-Ahmar, however, archaeologists discovered evidence suggesting that people were beginning to settle for longer periods, constructing substantial buildings and investing considerable effort in communal architecture. Among the site's most intriguing discoveries are several large circular structures unlike ordinary homes. Built partially below ground and supported by massive wooden posts, these buildings appear to have served collective rather than domestic purposes. Stone benches lined portions of the interior, while carefully arranged features suggest that gatherings, ceremonies, or community meetings may have taken place within these spaces. Exactly what occurred inside them remains uncertain. Some researchers believe they functioned as communal storage facilities, protecting valuable food supplies that belonged to the entire settlement. Others argue that their elaborate design points toward ritual activities or early forms of organized decision-making. The distinction is important because it touches upon one of archaeology's enduring questions. Did organized religion encourage people to settle together, or did permanent settlements gradually give rise to more formal religious practices? Jerf el-Ahmar occupies a fascinating position within that debate. The settlement also reveals evidence of increasingly sophisticated planning. Storage buildings appear carefully organized, suggesting that food was collected, preserved, and perhaps distributed collectively. Such arrangements imply cooperation extending beyond individual families. Rather than acting as isolated households, villagers may already have been developing systems that required trust, coordination, and shared responsibility. Yet, several aspects remain difficult to explain fully. Why were certain buildings intentionally burned before being abandoned? Excavations indicate that some structures experienced controlled fires rather than accidental destruction. In some cases, valuable architectural elements remained carefully arranged even after the burning occurred. Archaeologists have proposed several possibilities. Perhaps fire formed part of a ceremonial rebuilding process, symbolically ending one chapter before another began. Alternatively, practical reasons may have guided these actions, with damaged structures deliberately cleared before reconstruction. The evidence supports multiple interpretations without clearly favoring one. The settlement's eventual abandonment presents another puzzle. Environmental changes, shifting river conditions, resource pressures, or evolving social networks have all been suggested as contributing factors. Communities during this period were remarkably adaptable, and relocation may simply have reflected changing opportunities rather than crisis. Even so, the precise reasons remain uncertain. Beyond mainstream archaeological interpretation, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that sites such as Jerf el-Ahmar preserve evidence of sophisticated social knowledge appearing with surprising speed after the end of the last ice age. Others see the impressive communal buildings as signs of cultural traditions inherited from earlier groups whose settlements have yet to be discovered. While these proposals remain highly speculative and lack definitive supporting evidence, they reflect broader attempts to understand how complex cooperation emerged so early in human history. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not hidden within a single artifact or structure, but within the people themselves. What conversations unfolded inside those circular halls? What beliefs united the community as they crossed the uncertain boundary between a mobile existence and a settled one? The stones preserve outlines of buildings, but the ideas that shaped them remain largely invisible. Although much has been learned from the excavations completed before the site disappeared beneath rising waters, Jerf el-Ahmar continues to occupy a remarkable place in the story of humanity. It captures a society standing at the threshold of profound change, leaving behind clues that illuminate one of history's earliest chapters while quietly reminding us that some of its most important questions have yet to find their answers. From settlements that reveal the earliest foundations of organized society, our journey now moves forward to a city whose disappearance echoed through the ancient world. Unlike Jerf el-Ahmar, where time slowly buried the traces of a changing community, Helike is remembered for a single catastrophic night, a moment when an entire city seemed to dissolve into legend before eventually returning through archaeology. Along the northern coast of the Peloponnese, facing the calm waters of the Gulf of Corinth, Helike was once among the most prosperous cities of ancient Greece. Fertile plains stretched inland, while the sea connected the city to trade routes that linked communities throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Ancient writers described a thriving center of commerce, politics, and religion, best known for its magnificent sanctuary dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. For centuries, Helike flourished. Coins bearing its symbols circulated widely, travelers visited its temples, and its influence extended well beyond its surrounding territory. Yet, despite its importance, Helike eventually became known not for its achievements, but for its sudden disappearance. According to historical accounts, disaster struck during the winter of 373 BC. Ancient historians including Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, and Pausanias described a powerful earthquake followed by massive flooding that overwhelmed the city. Buildings collapsed, the ground fractured, and seawater rushed inland. By morning, Helike had reportedly disappeared beneath water and mud, leaving behind little more than scattered ruins beneath a shallow lagoon. The event left a profound impression on the ancient imagination. Some writers interpreted the catastrophe as divine punishment. One tradition claimed that the people of Helike had offended Poseidon by refusing sanctuary to Ionian refugees or by committing sacrilegious acts connected with his temple. Since Poseidon was believed to command both earthquakes and the sea, the city's destruction appeared, to many observers, as a direct expression of divine anger. Modern archaeology approaches the story from a different perspective. The Gulf of Corinth lies within one of Europe's most active seismic zones. Powerful earthquakes have shaped the region for countless millennia, and geological studies confirm that coastal subsidence, liquefaction, and tsunami-like waves can occur during major seismic events. These natural processes provide a plausible explanation for how an entire settlement could rapidly sink beneath layers of sediment and floodwater. Even so, locating Helike proved unexpectedly difficult. For generations, scholars searched beneath the sea, assuming the city still rested underwater exactly as ancient writers had described. Divers explored offshore areas, while historians carefully compared classical texts with changing coastlines. Yet years of investigation produced little convincing evidence. Then the search took an unexpected turn. Geological research suggested that the coastline itself had changed dramatically over more than 2,000 years. Rivers flowing from nearby mountains had gradually deposited enormous quantities of sediment, pushing the shoreline outward. If this process had occurred after Helike's destruction, the city might no longer lie beneath the sea at all. Excavations inland eventually uncovered compelling archaeological remains. Researchers identified structures, roads, pottery, coins, and other artifacts dating to the classical period beneath thick layers of silt. The discoveries strongly suggested that Helike had indeed been overwhelmed by earthquake-induced flooding and rapidly buried beneath sediment, rather than remaining permanently submerged beneath open water. Yet, important questions remain unresolved. How quickly did the destruction unfold? Ancient descriptions suggest extraordinary speed, but reconstructing the exact sequence of earthquakes, ground failure, flooding, and burial remains a complex geological challenge. Some evidence indicates that liquefaction may have caused entire sections of the city to lose stability within moments, while subsequent flooding completed the destruction. Other researchers argue that multiple events unfolding over hours, or even days, may better explain the archaeological record. The sanctuary of Poseidon also continues to attract particular attention. Although evidence associated with religious activity has been discovered in the region, the precise location and appearance of the famous temple described by ancient writers remain uncertain. Was it completely destroyed during the catastrophe, dismantled over later centuries, or does part of it still lie buried beneath deposits that have yet to be excavated? Beyond mainstream scholarship, Helike has naturally inspired more speculative interpretations. Some have proposed that the city's fate contributed to later traditions describing entire lands consumed by the sea. Because the philosopher Plato wrote about Atlantis only a few decades after Helike's destruction, a few researchers have suggested that memories of this real disaster may have influenced aspects of his famous narrative. Most classicists regard Atlantis as a philosophical allegory rather than a historical account, and there is no direct evidence linking the two stories. Nevertheless, the comparison illustrates how dramatic natural disasters can become woven into enduring cultural traditions. Standing on the quiet plains where Helike once stood, it is difficult to imagine the thriving city described by ancient authors. Fields now cover ground that may once have supported marketplaces, homes, and sacred temples. Beneath layers of sediment rests the record of one of antiquity's most dramatic natural disasters, a reminder that even prosperous cities can disappear with astonishing speed. And despite decades of excavation, one question continues to linger beneath the soil. How much of Helike's final chapter still remains beyond the reach of discovery? As Helike demonstrates how entire cities can disappear through the forces of nature, other ancient places leave behind a different kind of puzzle, not one of sudden destruction, but of uncertain purpose. Sometimes the greatest archaeological mystery is not where a structure went, but why it was built in the first place. Among the carefully planned streets of the Indus Valley civilization, few discoveries invite more debate than the massive structures traditionally known as the Harappa Granaries. The ancient city of Harappa rises from the plains of present-day Pakistan, where the Ravi River once flowed much closer to its walls. From a distance, its baked brick foundations appear orderly and deliberate, reflecting a civilization that valued planning on an extraordinary scale. Straight streets intersect at right angles, sophisticated drainage channels run beneath neighborhoods, and standardized bricks appear throughout the settlement. Every element suggests careful organization, yet one group of buildings has remained particularly difficult to explain. Near the elevated western mound stand the remains of large brick platforms divided into a series of rectangular compartments. When British archaeologists first excavated these foundations during the early 20th century, they proposed that the structures served as enormous public granaries, capable of storing vast quantities of grain collected from surrounding agricultural communities. At first, the interpretation seemed convincing. The Indus Valley civilization flourished between roughly 2600 and 1900 BC, supporting some of the largest urban centers of the ancient world, including Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, and Rakhigarhi. Feeding such populations would have required efficient systems of food production, storage, and distribution. Massive storage facilities appeared entirely reasonable within such a highly organized society. Certain architectural details seem to support this view. The buildings were constructed on raised platforms that may have protected stored goods from seasonal flooding. Narrow passageways separated the brick foundations, leading some researchers to suggest they promoted air circulation beneath wooden floors, helping preserve harvested grain in the region's warm climate. Nearby working areas and open courtyards appeared consistent with large-scale agricultural processing. Yet, as excavations continued, uncertainty slowly emerged. One of the most significant challenges involves the absence of direct evidence for stored grain. Archaeologists have recovered relatively few large concentrations of cereal remains within these buildings. If they truly functioned as central granaries over long periods, why are clear traces of grain so limited? Preservation conditions may explain part of the problem, but the question has encouraged scholars to reconsider long-held assumptions. Alternative interpretations have gradually gained attention. Some archaeologists now argue that the structures may have served as warehouses storing a variety of goods rather than grain alone. Others suggest they functioned as assembly halls, administrative centers, or places where taxes or trade commodities were collected before redistribution. Because the civilization's writing system remains undeciphered, no surviving texts exist to clarify the building's original purpose. This absence of written explanation makes every architectural detail unusually important. The Indus civilization produced thousands of inscribed seals bearing short sequences of symbols, yet despite decades of study, the script has resisted convincing decipherment. Without administrative records describing taxation, storage, commerce, or public institutions, archaeologists must rely almost entirely on physical evidence. Every wall, platform, doorway, and artifact becomes part of a larger puzzle whose final pieces remain missing. The mystery extends beyond the buildings themselves. Harappa belonged to a civilization displaying remarkable consistency across an immense geographic area. Standardized weights, carefully proportioned bricks, sophisticated sanitation systems, and extensive trade networks all point toward impressive coordination. Yet clear evidence for kings, royal palaces, standing armies, or monumental temples remains surprisingly limited. How such a vast urban civilization organized its economy and governance continues to inspire vigorous debate. Were these so-called granaries managed by civic officials responsible for supporting the population during poor harvests? Did merchants control them as commercial warehouses connected to long-distance trade? Or were they multifunctional spaces whose role changed over generations as the city evolved? Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative interpretations occasionally appear. Some writers have suggested that the immense platforms reflect an unusually advanced economic system whose organizational methods remain difficult for modern scholars to reconstruct. Others argue that archaeologists may have underestimated the ceremonial significance of these structures, proposing that food storage and ritual activities were more closely connected than previously assumed. At present, however, available evidence does not conclusively support any single interpretation, leaving room for continued investigation rather than certainty. Standing among the weathered brick foundations today, it is striking how much survives and how much remains silent. The precision of the architecture speaks of careful planning, cooperation, and long-term vision, yet its intended function continues to elude complete understanding. Until the Indus script can be read, or new discoveries provide fresh evidence, the Harappa Granaries remain more than ancient ruins. They stand as enduring reminders that even one of humanity's most sophisticated early civilizations still guards some of its most fundamental questions, waiting for future discoveries to reveal what these remarkable buildings were truly meant to accomplish. From the uncertain purpose of monumental buildings, our journey continues into one of the greatest urban civilizations of the ancient world. Here, the mystery does not lie in a missing city or an undeciphered monument alone, but in a collection of massive structures whose true function has remained the subject of debate for nearly a century. At the heart of Harappa, these immense brick foundations continued to invite more questions than answers. The ruins of Harappa emerge from the broad plains of the Indus River basin, where fertile fields once supported one of humanity's earliest urban societies. Today, weathered bricks and low earthen mounds are all that remain of a city that flourished between approximately 2600 and 1900 BC. Yet, beneath this quiet landscape, once stood carefully planned neighborhoods, sophisticated drainage systems, workshops, marketplaces, and public buildings that reflected an impressive level of organization. Among these structures, one group has drawn particular attention from archaeologists. Near the western fortified mound lie the remains of enormous brick platforms divided into a series of rectangular blocks. Early excavators, including Sir Mortimer Wheeler and others who studied the site during the 20th century, identified these foundations as granaries, large public storage facilities designed to hold surplus grain collected from surrounding farming communities. The idea appeared logical. A city of Harappa's size would have required dependable food supplies throughout the year. Agricultural surplus could have supported craftsmen, merchants, administrators, and laborers, while providing security during poor harvests or seasonal shortages. Massive storage buildings seemed entirely consistent with a civilization that displayed remarkable precision in city planning, standardized weights and measures, and extensive long-distance trade. Certain architectural features strengthened this interpretation. The brick platforms were elevated above ground level, potentially protecting stored goods from damp conditions or seasonal flooding. Narrow passages separated the foundations, leading researchers to suggest they promoted ventilation beneath wooden floors. Nearby, open spaces may have accommodated carts, laborers, or livestock transporting harvested crops into storage. For decades, the structures became widely known simply as the Harappa Granaries. Yet, archaeology rarely remains static. As excavation methods improved and researchers re-examined earlier discoveries, questions began to emerge. Surprisingly little direct evidence of stored grain was recovered within the structures themselves. Charred cereal remains, storage containers, and other materials normally associated with large-scale grain storage appeared far less abundant than many scholars expected. Could the buildings have served another purpose? Some archaeologists now argue that the traditional label granary may be misleading. Rather than functioning as centralized food warehouses, the buildings might have been assembly halls, administrative centers, or storage facilities for a variety of valuable goods. Others have suggested they could have supported raised wooden structures whose organic materials disappeared thousands of years ago, leaving only the brick foundations behind. The uncertainty illustrates one of the greatest challenges facing researchers who study the Indus Valley civilization. Unlike ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, Harappa has left no readable historical records. Thousands of seals bearing short inscriptions have been discovered across the civilization, but the Indus script remains undeciphered despite decades of international study. Without written documents describing taxation, food distribution, government administration, or public architecture, every interpretation must rely almost entirely upon the physical evidence preserved in the ground. This silence has transformed ordinary buildings into enduring puzzles. The broader organization of Harappan society remains equally intriguing. Cities spread across thousands of square miles share striking similarities in architecture, engineering, brick dimensions, and urban planning. Such consistency suggests remarkable coordination, yet archaeologists have found little evidence for powerful kings, royal tombs, monumental palaces, or large standing armies comparable to those of other Bronze Age civilizations. How was such a vast urban network governed? Did communities cooperate through councils of local leaders? Was authority shared among merchants, religious specialists, or administrators whose influence left few visible monuments? Or has evidence for centralized leadership simply not survived? The so-called granaries stand at the center of these larger questions because their function could reveal how resources were managed throughout the civilization. If they truly stored grain collected from surrounding farms, they may point toward organized public administration capable of supporting large populations. If they served another purpose entirely, historians may need to rethink fundamental assumptions about Harappan economic life. Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative ideas occasionally surface. Some writers have proposed that the structures formed part of a sophisticated logistical system unlike anything previously recognized in the ancient world. Others suggest that ceremonial activities may have taken place alongside practical storage, blurring distinctions between civic administration and ritual life. While such theories remain unproven, they reflect the remarkable uncertainty that still surrounds these buildings. Standing among the surviving brick platforms today, there is an unmistakable sense that the structures were designed with purpose and precision. Every foundation speaks of careful planning, yet their original role remains just beyond complete understanding. Until new excavations, fresh analytical techniques, or perhaps the eventual decipherment of the Indus script provide clearer answers, the Harappa Granaries continue to occupy a rare place in archaeology, a monument whose greatest mystery is not how it was built, but what it was truly built to do. From the carefully planned cities of the Indus Valley, our exploration now shifts to a landscape where architecture seems to merge with the mountains themselves. Here, the mystery is shaped not by undeciphered buildings alone, but by an entire culture whose identity remains partly veiled by time, difficult terrain, and the silence of history. High in the cloud-covered Andes, the legacy of the Chachapoya continues to invite careful investigation. The eastern slopes of northern Peru rise into a world where dense forests cling to steep cliffs and drifting mist softens the outlines of ancient stone walls. Deep valleys disappear beneath layers of cloud, while narrow ridges connect isolated mountaintops that seem suspended between earth and sky. Hidden among these dramatic landscapes are the remains of circular settlements, cliffside tombs, ceremonial platforms, and towering funerary statues, all built by a people remembered today as the Chachapoya, often called the Cloud People. Unlike the Inca, whose empire left extensive architectural remains and historical traditions, the Chachapoya remain comparatively elusive. Archaeological evidence suggests their culture flourished from around AD 800 until their eventual incorporation into the expanding Inca Empire during the late 15th century. They occupied an environment unlike almost any other major Andean society, adapting to humid cloud forests rather than the high open plateaus more commonly associated with the Andes. Their settlements reveal remarkable engineering. One of the largest known sites, Cuelap, crowns a mountain ridge behind immense stone walls that reach heights of nearly 60 feet in places. Within these fortifications stand hundreds of circular buildings arranged across carefully prepared terraces. Narrow entrances, intricate stone decorations, and commanding views suggest a community that combined defense, ceremony, and daily life within a single monumental complex. Yet, even impressive cities tell only part of the story. Perhaps the most striking expressions of Chachapoya culture are found on nearly inaccessible cliff faces. High above deep ravines stand human-shaped funerary statues known as Puran Machis, their silent figures watching over the valleys below. Elsewhere, elaborate mausoleums were constructed directly into vertical rock walls, preserving bundles of human remains together with textiles, ceramics, and offerings placed beside the deceased. The choice of such extraordinary burial locations continues to intrigue researchers. Practical considerations undoubtedly played a role. Cliffside tombs offered protection from animals, flooding, and many forms of disturbance. At the same time, their elevated position may have carried profound symbolic meaning. Placing ancestors high above the landscape could have reflected beliefs linking mountains, spirits, and the continued presence of the dead within the lives of the living. Many aspects of Chachapoya society, however, remain uncertain. Unlike civilizations that produced surviving written records, the Chachapoya left no deciphered texts describing their political organization, religious beliefs, or historical traditions. Much of what is known comes from archaeology and later accounts written after the Inca conquest and the arrival of the Spanish. These sources provide valuable information, but were recorded through outside perspectives, making it difficult to separate first-hand observation from interpretation. One enduring mystery concerns the extent of Chachapoya unity. Were they governed as a single kingdom, or did numerous independent communities simply share similar cultural traditions? Archaeological evidence points toward regional diversity rather than centralized political control. Yet, the impressive scale of sites such as Cuelap suggests periods of significant cooperation. Exactly how these mountain communities organize themselves remains open to debate. The circumstances surrounding their decline also invite continued investigation. Historical sources indicate that the Inca encountered determined resistance while expanding into Chachapoya territory. Following incorporation into the empire, many local populations were reportedly relocated under the Inca policy of Mitmac, dispersing communities across distant regions. Only decades later, European diseases spread rapidly through the Andes, devastating populations already transformed by conquest and political upheaval. Together, these events reshaped Chachapoya society so profoundly that much of its earlier identity faded from view. Another question has persisted for centuries. Early Spanish chroniclers occasionally described some Chachapoya individuals as possessing comparatively lighter skin or hair than neighboring populations. These observations inspired generations of speculation, with some proposing distant migrations from Europe or other unexpected origins. Modern archaeological, genetic, and anthropological research, however, provides no convincing evidence supporting such claims. Most scholars regard these descriptions as subjective colonial observations influenced by unfamiliar appearances, environmental factors, or literary exaggeration rather than proof of separate ancestry. Even so, the persistence of these accounts illustrates how limited historical evidence often leaves room for competing interpretations. Beyond mainstream archaeology, some researchers have suggested that many Chachapoya ceremonial centers and burial sites remain undiscovered within the vast cloud forests. Advances in LiDAR technology and continued field surveys are steadily revealing new terraces, pathways, and structures hidden beneath dense vegetation. Each discovery expands the known extent of their landscape while raising fresh questions about how many communities still await recognition. Standing before the cliffside tombs, as mist drifts slowly across the mountains, it becomes clear that the greatest mystery is not simply how the Chachapoya lived, but how much of their story has yet to emerge from the forests they once called home. Every newly uncovered wall and every silent funerary figure suggests that the cloud-covered valleys may still preserve chapters of their history that have remained undisturbed for centuries, waiting patiently for the next careful discovery. As the mist-covered mountains of the Chachapoya remind us how entire cultures can fade into silence, our journey now follows Peru's coastline, where another remarkable discovery transformed long-held assumptions about power, leadership, and ritual in the ancient Andes. Here, the mystery centers not on a forgotten city, but on a single tomb whose occupant continues to challenge everything archaeologists once believed. Along Peru's arid northern coast, where the Pacific Ocean meets broad desert plains, the archaeological complex of El Brujo rises above the landscape in a series of immense adobe pyramids. Wind carries fine sand across weathered walls, decorated with colorful murals depicting warriors, serpents, supernatural beings, and ceremonial processions. For centuries, these monuments stood quietly beneath layers of earth, preserving traces of the Moche civilization, a society that flourished between approximately AD 100 and 800. Unlike the Inca, the Moche left no known writing system. Their history survives through architecture, painted ceramics, intricate metalwork, and the careful placement of offerings within tombs. Every excavation becomes an act of interpretation, requiring archaeologists to reconstruct beliefs, political structures, and daily life from objects rather than written records. Few discoveries have been more significant than the one made at El Brujo in 2005. Hidden within a carefully prepared burial chamber lay the remarkably preserved remains of a woman whose wealth immediately distinguished her from ordinary members of society. She had been buried with elaborate jewelry fashioned from gold, silver, copper, and precious stones. Fine textiles surrounded her body, while ceremonial objects, weaving tools, clubs, spear throwers, and ritual equipment accompanied her into the afterlife. The discovery quickly became known around the world as the tomb of the Lady of Kao. At first, the burial presented an unexpected challenge to established ideas. For many years, scholars believed that the highest political and ceremonial authority within Moche society had been held almost exclusively by men. Images found on ceramics and murals frequently portrayed male warriors, rulers, and priests conducting elaborate rituals. Yet, the extraordinary richness of the Lady of Kao's burial suggested that she herself occupied a position of exceptional authority. Further examination strengthened this conclusion. Her arms and hands bore intricate tattoos depicting snakes, spiders, marine creatures, and geometric designs, many of which remained preserved beneath her skin after nearly 17 centuries. These permanent markings may have reflected religious symbolism, elite identity, or ceremonial responsibilities. Nearby grave goods indicated not only wealth but also power, suggesting she may have exercised both political and spiritual influence. Even so, important questions remain. Was the Lady of Kao an individual whose authority was unique, or did she represent a broader tradition of female leadership that had previously gone unrecognized? Archaeologists have since identified additional high-status female burials elsewhere in the Moche world, lending support to the idea that women occasionally occupied positions of considerable importance. Yet, the exact nature of that authority continues to be debated. Some researchers view her primarily as a religious leader whose influence centered upon ritual ceremonies, seasonal observances, and communication with the spiritual world. Others argue that the evidence points toward political leadership as well, perhaps involving direct governance over surrounding communities. Without written records, distinguishing between religious and administrative power remains exceptionally difficult. The burial itself offers further layers of mystery. The tomb appears to have been carefully planned according to complex ceremonial traditions. Several individuals were buried nearby, leading some archaeologists to suggest they may have served or accompanied the elite woman in death. Whether these burials reflect ritual sacrifice, honored attendance, or other cultural practices remains an area of ongoing investigation. The murals surrounding El Brujo deepen the uncertainty. Many depict scenes involving supernatural figures, ritual combat, prisoners, and elaborate ceremonies that appear closely connected to Moche religious beliefs. Scholars generally interpret these images as expressions of mythology, political authority, and ceremonial life. Yet, because no accompanying texts explain their meaning, many details remain open to interpretation. Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that the Lady of Kao belonged to a hereditary priestly lineage possessing knowledge passed down through generations, while others propose that her tattoos encoded symbolic systems still only partly understood today. Although such possibilities remain unproven, Ongoing research continues to reveal that Moche iconography was far more sophisticated than once believed. The discovery also raises broader questions about the civilization itself. The Moche produced monumental architecture, advanced irrigation systems, extraordinary metallurgy, and remarkably realistic portrait ceramics, yet many aspects of their political organization remain uncertain. Rather than forming a single unified empire, they may have consisted of several powerful regional centers linked through shared religious traditions and cultural practices. If so, the Lady of Kau may represent only one chapter of a much larger story still waiting to be uncovered. Standing before the reconstructed tomb today, surrounded by carefully preserved artifacts and the silent adobe pyramids of El Brujo, it becomes clear that one remarkable burial has permanently reshaped our understanding of an ancient civilization. Yet, despite decades of study, the woman herself remains partly beyond reach. Her titles, her voice, her beliefs, and the full extent of her influence have all been carried away by time, leaving behind a question that still echoes through the desert. How many more forgotten rulers remain hidden beneath the sands, waiting to rewrite history once again? From the desert pyramids of El Brujo, where a single royal burial reshaped our understanding of ancient authority, our journey now moves eastward to another monumental structure built for an entirely different purpose. Here, the mystery is not centered on one remarkable individual, but on an immense sacred complex whose towering walls still overlook the plains after more than 3,000 years. At Chogha, Zanbil, every brick seems to preserve a fragment of a civilization whose beliefs remain only partly understood. Rising from the lowlands of southwestern Iran, Chogha Zanbil stands apart from the surrounding landscape with quiet authority. Even in its weathered state, the massive stepped structure dominates the plain, its baked bricks glowing softly beneath the intense sunlight. Long before modern roads crossed the region, pilgrims, priests, and royal officials would have approached this towering monument from great distances, watching it emerge above the horizon as the spiritual heart of an entire sacred city. The site was founded around 1250 BC by the Elamite king Untasnapirisha, who envisioned something unlike the traditional capitals of his kingdom. Rather than expanding an existing city, he established a new ceremonial center known in antiquity as Dur Untash. At its heart stood a monumental ziggurat dedicated primarily to the god Inshushinak, the patron deity of the nearby city of Susa, while additional temples honored other important Elamite gods. Unlike the familiar pyramids of Egypt, a ziggurat was not designed as a royal tomb. Instead, these towering stepped platforms supported sacred temples elevated above the ordinary world. Their height may have symbolized a connection between earth and the heavens, creating a place where rituals could be performed closer to the divine realm. Chogha Zanbil represents one of the best preserved surviving examples of this architectural tradition, offering an unusually complete view of ancient Elamite religious life. Its construction demonstrates remarkable planning. Millions of mud bricks formed the inner core, while carefully fired bricks protected the exterior surfaces. Many of these baked bricks still bear inscriptions naming King Untasnapirisha and recording his dedication of the monument to the gods. Sophisticated drainage systems were incorporated into the structure to protect it from seasonal rainfall, revealing an impressive understanding of engineering as well as architecture. Yet, despite its monumental scale, Chogha Zanbil raises an intriguing question. Why was such an extraordinary ceremonial city established only to be abandoned relatively soon afterward? Historical evidence suggests that construction continued for only a few decades before political circumstances changed. Following the death of Untasnapirisha, royal attention appears to have shifted elsewhere. Later, military campaigns by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal during the 7th century BC inflicted severe damage upon Elamite territory, including sacred sites connected with the kingdom. Although Chogha Zanbil survived in partial form, its role as a major religious center gradually came to an end. Still, archaeology suggests the story is more complex than simple conquest. Excavations have uncovered extensive defensive walls, temples, royal residences, workshops, and water management systems, indicating that the city was carefully planned as both a ceremonial and administrative center. Yet, many areas appear unfinished, raising the possibility that the ambitious project was never completed according to its original vision. Why did such a significant undertaking lose momentum? Some historians believe shifting political priorities redirected labor and resources toward more practical concerns elsewhere in the kingdom. Others point to changing regional alliances, economic pressures, or dynastic instability that may have limited the city's long-term development. Without extensive surviving historical records from the Elamites themselves, these explanations remain difficult to confirm with certainty. The religious significance of the site also continues to invite investigation. Thousands of inscribed bricks identify the deities honored within the complex, yet the ceremonies performed atop the Ziggurat remain only partly understood. Archaeologists have uncovered altars, offering tables and ritual objects, but the precise sequence of festivals, prayers, and sacred rites has largely disappeared from history. Did pilgrims travel from across Elam to worship here during specific seasons? Were only priests permitted to ascend the upper terraces? Or did the summit remain accessible solely to the highest religious authorities? Beyond mainstream archaeology, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that the Lady of Kau belonged to a hereditary priestly lineage possessing knowledge passed down through generations, while others propose that her tattoos encoded symbolic systems still only partly understood today. Although such possibilities remain unproven, ongoing research continues to reveal that Moche iconography was far more sophisticated than once believed. The discovery also raises broader questions about the civilization itself. The Moche produced monumental architecture, advanced irrigation systems, extraordinary metallurgy, and remarkably realistic portrait ceramics, yet many aspects of their political organization remain uncertain. Rather than forming a single unified empire, they may have consisted of several powerful regional centers linked through shared religious traditions and cultural practices. If so, the Lady of Kau may represent only one chapter of a much larger story still waiting to be uncovered. Standing before the reconstructed tomb today, surrounded by carefully preserved artifacts and the silent adobe pyramids of El Brujo, it becomes clear that one remarkable burial has permanently reshaped our understanding of an ancient civilization. Yet, despite decades of study, the woman herself remains partly beyond reach. Her titles, her voice, her beliefs, and the full extent of her influence have all been carried away by time, leaving behind a question that still echoes through the desert. How many more forgotten rulers remain hidden beneath the sands, waiting to rewrite history once again? From the towering terraces of Chogha Zanbil, where sacred architecture reflected the ambitions of an ancient kingdom, our journey now turns toward a quieter monument shaped not by cities or empires, but by a solitary hill overlooking the Atlantic coast. Here, the mystery is carried not in towering walls or inscribed bricks, but in an immense mound of stone whose purpose, age, and occupant continue to inspire both archaeological inquiry and enduring tradition. Rising prominently above the landscape of County Sligo in Western Ireland, Knocknarea dominates the surrounding countryside. Its broad, limestone summit commands sweeping views of mountains, lakes, fertile plains, and the restless Atlantic Ocean beyond. At the very top rests an enormous stone cairn, visible for miles in every direction. Built from thousands upon thousands of limestone rocks gathered by human hands, the monument appears almost timeless, blending so naturally with the hill that it can seem as though it has always belonged there. Known as the Cairn of Knocknarea, this remarkable structure measures approximately 55 meters in diameter and nearly 10 meters in height. It is one of Ireland's largest prehistoric cairns, constructed during the Neolithic period, most likely around 3000 BC, although its precise date remains uncertain. Unlike many other prehistoric monuments that have been extensively excavated, the interior of Knocknarea has never been fully explored. As a result, much of what lies beneath its vast covering of stone remains unknown. This uncertainty has only deepened its fascination. Archaeologists generally believe the cairn serves as a passage tomb, similar in concept to other monumental burial sites scattered across Ireland, including Newgrange and Carrowmore, which lies only a short distance away. Such tombs often contained carefully built stone chambers aligned with astronomical events or ceremonial practices, serving not merely as places of burial, but as powerful expressions of memory, ancestry, and spiritual belief. Yet, unlike many comparable monuments, no central burial chamber has ever been conclusively identified within Knocknarea. Geophysical surveys and limited investigations have offered tantalizing clues, but without large-scale excavation, the monument continues to guard its interior. Does a stone chamber still survive beneath the immense pile of limestone? Was it constructed differently from other Irish passage tombs? Or could its purpose have extended beyond burial altogether? Adding to the intrigue is the monument's commanding position within a much larger ceremonial landscape. The surrounding region contains one of the richest concentrations of prehistoric monuments in Ireland. Stone circles, smaller cairns, standing stones, and ancient cemeteries spread across the countryside, suggesting that Knocknarea occupied the center of a landscape shaped by ritual over many centuries. Rather than existing in isolation, the cairn may have functioned as part of an interconnected network where ceremonies, seasonal gatherings, and ancestral traditions unfolded across generations. The monument's association with Irish mythology has further enriched its reputation. According to long-standing tradition, the cairn marks the burial place of Queen Medb, one of the most celebrated figures in early Irish legend. Medieval literary sources describe Medb as the formidable Queen of Connaught, remembered for her leadership during the epic known as the Táin Bó Cúailnge, or the cattle raid of Cooley. Folklore claims she was buried standing upright, facing her enemies, prepared to defend her kingdom even in death. From a historical perspective, however, this tradition presents important questions. The legendary accounts of Queen Medb were recorded many centuries after the cairn itself was likely constructed. If the monument dates to around 3000 BC, it would predate the traditional setting of the Irish heroic tales by well over 2,000 years. Most archaeologists therefore regard the association as symbolic rather than literal, believing that later generations attached the famous queen's name to an already ancient monument whose original builders had long been forgotten. Even so, the persistence of the legend reveals something significant. Ancient monuments often acquire new meanings as cultures evolve. A structure first built for one purpose may later become woven into stories that preserve its importance long after its true origins fade from memory. In this way, folklore and archaeology do not necessarily compete. Instead, they offer different perspectives on how people understand places of enduring significance. Beyond mainstream archaeological interpretation, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some researchers have suggested that Knocknarea may have served as an astronomical marker, with its location carefully chosen to align with seasonal events or surrounding sacred sites. Others have proposed that the hill itself was regarded as a ceremonial gathering place where rituals connected the living with ancestors and the wider landscape. While evidence for such theories remains incomplete, ongoing studies continue to explore how prehistoric communities organized these remarkable ceremonial environments. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies beneath the cairn itself. Because the monument has never undergone complete excavation, its central structure, if one exists, remains largely untouched. Many archaeologists argue that preserving the site is more valuable than disturbing it, allowing future generations equipped with more advanced technologies to investigate without unnecessary damage. Standing atop Knocknarea today, surrounded by sweeping views and the constant Atlantic wind, it is difficult not to sense the weight of countless generations who have looked upon the same horizon. The Great Cairn has endured for more than 5,000 years, quietly overlooking the changing world below. Yet, beneath its immense blanket of stone, the answers it was built to protect may still rest undisturbed, waiting for a time when history is finally ready to uncover them. From the stone-covered summit of Knocknarea, where a single monument has guarded its silence for thousands of years, our journey now descends beneath the earth itself. Here, the mystery is no longer carried by towering cairns or open landscapes, but by chambers carved into solid rock, places where the living honored the dead through rituals that remain only partly understood. Deep within the island of Sardinia, the necropolis of Anghelu Ruju offers a rare glimpse into one of prehistoric Europe's most enduring enigmas. The countryside surrounding Anghelu Ruju appears peaceful, marked by rolling fields, scattered olive trees, and pale limestone rising gently from the ground. Nothing immediately suggests that beneath this quiet landscape lies an intricate network of artificial caves created more than 5,000 years ago. Hidden below the surface are dozens of carefully carved burial chambers, connected by narrow passages and entrances shaped with remarkable precision. It is one of the largest prehistoric necropolises ever discovered in the Western Mediterranean. The site came to light in 1903 during quarrying work, when laborers unexpectedly broke into one of the underground tombs. As excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered more than 38 rock-cut chambers dating primarily between approximately 3,200 and 2,800 BC. Many of these tombs remained in use for generations, receiving repeated burials over centuries and preserving evidence of changing customs, beliefs, and social traditions. The tombs belong to a tradition known in Sardinia as Domus de Janus, often translated as Houses of the Fairies. The name comes from later local folklore, which imagined that supernatural beings once lived within these underground chambers. Archaeologists, however, recognize them as carefully planned burial spaces designed to resemble the homes of the living. Doorways, carved ceilings, benches, and architectural details imitate domestic structures, suggesting that death may have been viewed not as an ending, but as a continuation of existence in another realm. This architectural choice raises fascinating questions. Why invest such extraordinary effort in reproducing houses beneath the earth? Some researchers believe these chambers reflected the belief that ancestors continued to play an active role within their communities. Creating familiar surroundings for the dead may have symbolized an ongoing relationship between generations, strengthening family identity and collective memory long after death. The discoveries inside the tombs reinforce this impression. Archaeologists recovered pottery, stone tools, shell ornaments, animal bones, beads, and finely crafted objects placed beside the deceased. Many chambers contained the remains of numerous individuals rather than single burials, indicating that they served as collective family tombs used repeatedly over long periods. The careful arrangement of offerings suggests ceremonies that extended far beyond simple burial practices. One of the most intriguing features is the widespread use of red ochre. Many human remains and sections of the tomb interiors were covered with this vivid mineral pigment. Throughout prehistoric Europe, red ochre frequently appears in funerary contexts, and many archaeologists interpret it as a symbol of life, renewal, or rebirth. Yet, its precise meaning at Anghelu Ruju remains uncertain. Was it intended to represent blood, the cycle of nature, spiritual transformation, or beliefs now entirely lost? Without written records, the symbolism can only be approached through careful comparison with other prehistoric cultures. The necropolis also reveals evidence of long-term cultural change. Some tombs were modified over generations, while new chambers were added as communities expanded. Later, Bronze Age populations occasionally reused parts of the cemetery, demonstrating that the site retained significance long after its original builders had disappeared. Why this place remained sacred for so many centuries is still difficult to answer. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Anghelu Ruju has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some researchers have suggested that the underground layout reflects symbolic journeys between the worlds of the living and the dead, while others have explored possible astronomical or seasonal alignments associated with certain entrances. Although definitive evidence for these ideas remains limited, they highlight how carefully these spaces were designed rather than simply excavated. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not contained within any single artifact, but within the beliefs of the people who carved these chambers from solid stone with remarkable patience and precision. Every passage, every carved doorway, and every carefully placed offering reflects a worldview that can only be reconstructed in fragments. Standing at the entrance to these silent underground rooms today, it is impossible not to wonder how many generations once gathered here to honor their ancestors, and how many of their stories remain hidden within the stone, waiting for future discoveries to bring them into the light. From the underground chambers of Anghelu Ruju, where generations carefully prepared homes for the dead beneath layers of stone, our journey now follows another path into the ancient world of burial and remembrance. This time, the mystery leads to the banks of the Nile, where one forgotten tomb offers a rare glimpse into the lives of those who stood beside the Pharaoh, not as kings themselves, but as the powerful guardians of Egypt's sacred traditions. At the edge of the desert, where towering cliffs overlook the fertile Nile Valley, countless tombs have been carved into the limestone over thousands of years. Some belong to famous rulers whose names echo through history. Others were built for officials, priests, and administrators whose influence was once immense, but whose stories gradually faded after their deaths. Hidden among these quieter monuments are the resting places of Egypt's high priests, men whose authority often extended beyond religion into politics, education, and royal administration. One such tomb has become the focus of enduring archaeological curiosity. Although several high priests from different periods of Egyptian history have been identified through excavations, a number of richly decorated tombs have been discovered without complete certainty regarding their original occupants. Damage caused by tomb robbers, erosion, later reuse, and the passage of more than 3,000 years has erased names, titles, and inscriptions that might once have identified the individual with confidence. In some cases, archaeologists know they are standing inside the burial place of one of Egypt's highest-ranking religious figures, yet the owner's complete identity remains uncertain. The mystery begins with the tomb itself. Long corridors descend into chambers whose walls are covered with scenes of offerings, sacred ceremonies, hymns to the gods, and detailed depictions of the afterlife. Finely carved columns support ceilings painted with stars, while fragments of brightly colored reliefs still survive despite centuries of decay. Carefully arranged niches once held statues representing the deceased, allowing the spirit, or Ka, to receive offerings from the living long after death. These decorations reveal the extraordinary importance of their owner. The title of high priest carried immense responsibility in ancient Egypt. Whether serving Amun at Thebes, Ptah at Memphis, or another major deity, These men directed vast temple estates, supervised thousands of workers, managed agricultural wealth, advised the pharaoh, and oversaw some of the kingdom's most significant religious ceremonies. At times, particularly during periods of political instability, the influence of a high priest could rival that of the king himself. Yet, despite such authority, some of their tombs remained strangely elusive. In several cases, inscriptions were deliberately erased or damaged. This was not always the work of thieves. Ancient political rivalries occasionally led successors to remove the names and images of powerful individuals in an effort to weaken their memory after death. If a high priest fell from favor or became associated with a defeated political faction, his carefully prepared tomb might have been intentionally altered, leaving later generations with only fragments of his identity. Other clues raise equally intriguing questions. Some burial chambers appear unfinished despite the owner's apparent wealth and status. Decorative programs stop abruptly, walls remain only partially carved, and planned inscriptions were never completed. Archaeologists have suggested several explanations. The individual may have died unexpectedly before construction was finished. Political upheaval could have interrupted the work. Economic difficulties, changing royal priorities, or shifts in religious authority may also have contributed. The evidence allows multiple possibilities but offers no definitive answer. The objects recovered from such tombs provide only partial insight. Fragments of funerary papyri, ceremonial staffs, amulets, shabti figures, and ritual equipment reflect the owner's important religious role. Yet, many valuable items disappeared long ago through ancient robbery. In numerous Egyptian tombs, robbers entered only decades after burial, removing precious metals while leaving behind less valuable objects. Their actions preserved enough evidence for archaeological study while simultaneously destroying the complete story. Beyond mainstream scholarship, these forgotten priestly burials have inspired more speculative interpretations. Some researchers have wondered whether certain high priests possessed knowledge reserved for only a small circle within the temples, astronomical observations, sacred rituals, or theological traditions that were deliberately concealed from the wider population. Others have suggested that damaged inscriptions may hide evidence of political conflicts not fully recorded elsewhere. While no convincing evidence confirms these ideas, they reflect the remarkable influence that Egypt's religious leaders once held. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not the identity of a single forgotten priest, but the world he represented. Behind the pharaoh stood an entire network of scholars, scribes, architects, and temple officials whose work sustained one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. Their voices survive only in fragments carved into stone, interrupted by broken walls and empty chambers. Standing inside one of these silent tombs today, where faded paintings still glow beneath the dim light and ancient corridors disappear into darkness, it becomes clear that history has preserved only part of the story. Somewhere among the damaged inscriptions, unfinished carvings, and unopened chambers may still rest the missing pieces that could reveal who this powerful servant of the pharaoh truly was, and why time has guarded his identity for so long. From the silent tombs of Egypt, where faded inscriptions preserve only fragments of forgotten lives, our journey now reaches a much earlier chapter in the human story. Long before kings ruled from monumental temples or priests guided elaborate rituals, communities were already laying the foundations of settled life. Among the earliest of these was Sesklo, a village whose quiet ruins continue to raise profound questions about the origins of civilization itself. Nestled among the fertile plains of Thessaly in central Greece, the remains of the Sesklo Settlement overlook a landscape of gentle hills and open farmland. Even today, the location offers a commanding view of the surrounding countryside, where rich soil and reliable water sources would have made agriculture both practical and sustainable. At first glance, The low stone foundations appear modest compared to the grand monuments of later civilizations. Yet, beneath their simplicity lies evidence of one of Europe's earliest and most advanced farming communities. Archaeologists believe that Sesklo was occupied from around 6,800 BC, gradually developing into a thriving Neolithic settlement over many centuries. Stone houses stood close together, separated by narrow pathways that wound between homes, storage areas, and communal spaces. Unlike temporary camps used by earlier hunter-gatherers, these buildings were intended to last. Their sturdy foundations, mud brick walls, and carefully planned layouts reveal a society that had embraced permanent settlement, transforming both the landscape and the rhythm of daily life. The discoveries made at Sesklo have reshaped our understanding of prehistoric Europe. Excavations have uncovered finely crafted pottery decorated with striking red and white geometric patterns, polished stone tools, clay figurines, grinding stones, and evidence of cultivated wheat, barley, and domesticated animals. These findings suggest a community that had developed sophisticated farming practices while also placing considerable importance on craftsmanship and artistic expression. Yet, despite decades of research, many questions remain unanswered. One of the most intriguing concerns the settlement's remarkable size. During its height, Sesklo covered an area much larger than many contemporary Neolithic villages. Some researchers estimate that several thousand people may have lived there, making it one of the largest farming communities in Europe during its time. Such a population would have required careful organization, cooperation, and systems of food production capable of supporting long-term stability. How was such a community governed? Unlike later civilizations, Sesklo provides no evidence of written laws, royal palaces, or monumental administrative buildings. Archaeologists have found little to suggest the presence of powerful rulers or centralized political authority. Instead, the settlement appears relatively balanced in its architecture, with houses sharing broadly similar designs. Some scholars propose that leadership may have been based upon family groups, respected elders, or communal decision-making rather than formal hierarchies. Others argue that subtle differences in house size and location may hint at emerging social distinctions that remain difficult to detect. Another enduring mystery involves the settlement's eventual decline. Around the late Neolithic period, parts of Sesklo experienced destruction by fire. Burned building remains have been uncovered across sections of the site, but their cause remains uncertain. Accidental fires may have spread rapidly through mud brick homes supported by wooden beams and thatched roofs. Alternatively, conflict between neighboring communities has been suggested, particularly because another important Neolithic settlement, Dimini, emerged nearby during the following period. This possibility gave rise to one of archaeology's longest-running debates. Early researchers proposed that newcomers from Dimini may have invaded and replaced the people of Sesklo after violent confrontation. More recent archaeological evidence, however, paints a far more complex picture. Many scholars now believe that the two settlements may have coexisted for a period, with cultural change occurring gradually through interaction rather than conquest. Even so, the exact relationship between Sesklo and Dimini remains unresolved. The symbolic objects recovered from the settlement deepen the mystery. Numerous clay figurines depicting human forms, particularly female figures, have been discovered throughout the site. Some archaeologists interpret these objects as representations of fertility, household rituals, or protective ancestors. Others caution that assigning religious meaning without written evidence remains speculative. Were these figurines sacred objects, children's toys, artistic creations, or something entirely different? Their true purpose continues to be debated. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Sesklo has inspired broader theories about the spread of early farming throughout Europe. Some researchers view the settlement as part of a wider network through which agricultural knowledge, technology, and cultural traditions expanded gradually from Anatolia into the Balkans and beyond. Others suggest that communities like Sesklo developed distinctive innovations independently as farming societies adapted to new environments. While ongoing genetic and archaeological research continues to refine these ideas, the complete story of Europe's earliest farmers remains incomplete. Standing among the weathered foundations today, where only scattered stones mark the outlines of homes once filled with daily life, it is remarkable to consider how many of humanity's most familiar traditions began in places such as this. Families cultivated crops, raised children, crafted pottery, and gathered within permanent communities long before written history began. Yet, despite the thousands of artifacts recovered from Sesklo, the voices of its people remain silent. Their decisions, beliefs, and aspirations survive only through fragments left beneath the soil, inviting one enduring question. What other chapters of humanity's earliest settled communities have yet to emerge from the earth? From the quiet foundations of Sesklo, where some of Europe's earliest farming communities first learned to build permanent homes, our journey now moves to a landscape where survival demanded an entirely different kind of architecture. Here, homes were not spread across fertile plains but carved into towering cliffs, suspended high above the earth. The mystery is no longer simply how people lived, but why entire communities chose to build their lives upon nearly inaccessible walls of stone. Stretching for nearly 100 miles across central Mali, the Bandiagara Escarpment rises dramatically above the surrounding plains. Its sandstone cliffs soar hundreds of feet into the sky, creating one of Africa's most striking natural landscapes. At sunrise, the rock face glows in warm shades of red and gold, while narrow ledges, hidden caves, and ancient pathways gradually emerge from the shadows. From a distance, small structures appear to cling impossibly to the cliff face itself, their mud brick walls blending almost seamlessly with the stone. These are the famous cliff dwellings of Bandiagara. Some rest on narrow shelves that seem impossible to reach without climbing equipment. Others are tucked deep into natural recesses, hidden beneath overhanging rock that has protected them from centuries of wind and rain. Granaries with pointed roofs stand beside burial chambers, while ancient homes overlook vast stretches of open country below. Together, they form one of the world's most extraordinary archaeological landscapes. Today, the region is best known as the homeland of the Dogon people, whose villages continue to occupy portions of the escarpment and surrounding plateau. Rich artistic traditions, distinctive architecture, and complex ceremonial practices have made the Dogon one of West Africa's most carefully studied cultures. Yet, the oldest structures embedded within the cliffs were not built by the Dogon themselves. They belonged to an earlier people known as the Telem. Historical traditions maintained by the Dogon describe the Telem as the inhabitants who occupied the cliffs before their own arrival, probably between the 11th and 16th centuries A.D. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of this earlier culture, although many details of its history remain uncertain. The Telem eventually disappeared from the region, leaving behind only their remarkable architecture and carefully preserved burial sites. The question that immediately captures attention is simple. How were these structures built? Many of the oldest dwellings occupy ledges that remain extraordinarily difficult to access even today. Reaching them often requires climbing steep vertical faces or negotiating narrow paths that appear dangerous even with modern equipment. Constructing homes, granaries, and burial chambers in such locations would have demanded exceptional planning, physical skill, and intimate knowledge of the landscape. Archaeologists generally believe that ropes, wooden scaffolding, and temporary climbing systems allowed the builders to transport construction materials onto the cliffs. Similar techniques have been documented in other traditional societies facing comparable terrain. Even so, the precision with which many buildings were positioned continues to inspire admiration. The purpose of these elevated settlements has generated equally fascinating debate. Security almost certainly played an important role. High cliffs provided natural protection against raiding parties, conflict, and wild animals. Granaries positioned above the valley floor would have safeguarded precious food supplies, while elevated burial sites protected ancestral remains from disturbance. Yet, practical considerations alone may not fully explain the choice. Many cultures throughout the world associate high places with spiritual significance. Mountains, cliffs, and elevated platforms often become places where the boundary between the human world and the spiritual realm appears thinner. The Telem may have regarded the cliffs as sacred landscapes where ancestors remained close to the living, watching over the communities below. Their burial customs reinforce this possibility. Within caves scattered across the escarpment, archaeologists have uncovered remarkably preserved human remains, accompanied by textiles, wooden objects, pottery, leather goods, bows, arrows, woven baskets, and personal ornaments. The dry climate created ideal preservation conditions, allowing fragile materials to survive for centuries. These discoveries provide an unusually detailed picture of everyday life, craftsmanship, and funerary practices rarely preserved elsewhere in tropical Africa. Still, many aspects of Telem society remain elusive. Unlike civilizations that produced written records, the Telem left no surviving texts describing their beliefs, political organization, or origins. Their language has disappeared. Their traditions survive only indirectly through archaeology and the oral histories preserved by later populations. Every artifact recovered from the cliffs offers another fragment, but the larger picture remains incomplete. The transition between the Telem and the Dogon presents another enduring mystery. Most historians believe the Dogon gradually migrated into the region over several centuries, eventually settling along the escarpment while the Telem population declined or dispersed. Exactly how this transition unfolded remains uncertain. Did the two groups coexist peacefully for generations? Did cultural exchange occur between them? Or did environmental pressures, migration, or conflict gradually reshape the population of the region? Archaeological evidence suggests continuity in some practices alongside significant cultural differences in others. The precise relationship between these communities continues to be investigated. The landscape itself may also have influenced their choices. Rainfall across the Sahel has fluctuated dramatically over thousands of years. Periods of prolonged drought could have altered farming opportunities, water availability, and patterns of settlement throughout the region. Some researchers suggest that changing environmental conditions encouraged populations to seek greater security within the cliffs, where natural springs and defensible positions offered important advantages during uncertain times. Beyond mainstream archaeology, the Bandiagara Escarpment has inspired a wide range of speculative interpretations. Perhaps the most widely known involve later interpretations of Dogon cosmology. During the 20th century, some writers argued that aspects of Dogon traditional knowledge reflected advanced astronomical observations, particularly concerning the Sirius star system. These claims became widely circulated in popular literature and documentaries. However, most modern anthropologists and historians remain highly skeptical of these interpretations, noting that the evidence is disputed and that many conclusions rest upon contested ethnographic accounts rather than independently verified historical data. Other speculative ideas concern the Telem themselves. Their ability to construct buildings in apparently inaccessible locations has led some to propose forgotten engineering techniques or symbolic practices no longer understood today. In reality, archaeologists emphasize that determined human communities have repeatedly demonstrated extraordinary ingenuity when adapting to difficult landscapes. Nevertheless, the exact construction methods used for some of the highest structures continue to invite careful study. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how the cliff dwellings were built, but how much of their story has been erased by time. Countless caves remain only partially explored, while fragile organic materials continue to emerge from protected chambers with every new archaeological investigation. Advances in dating techniques, environmental analysis, and digital mapping are gradually revealing details that earlier generations of researchers could scarcely have imagined. Standing beneath the towering sandstone cliffs today, it is impossible not to feel the remarkable relationship between people and landscape that shaped this place for centuries. Above, ancient granaries still cling to impossible ledges. Burial caves remain sealed behind narrow openings. Empty homes continue to overlook the plains exactly as they did hundreds of years ago. The cliffs preserve more than architecture. They preserve the memory of an entire society whose voice has largely faded from history. And somewhere among those silent chambers, beyond the reach of weather and time, there may still rest discoveries capable of revealing who the Telem truly were, and why they chose to build their world so high above the earth. From the towering cliffs of Bandiagara, where entire communities carved their lives into sheer rock faces, our journey returns to the quiet countryside of Britain. Here, the monuments are far less dramatic in appearance, yet no less profound in their mystery. Beneath gentle hills and grassy fields lie chambers built by some of Europe's earliest farming communities, places where memory, ritual, and ancestry became permanently woven into the landscape. In the rolling countryside of Somerset, southwestern England, a long, grassy mound rises almost imperceptibly above the surrounding fields. Sheep graze peacefully nearby, and ancient hedgerows trace the boundaries of the landscape much as they have for centuries. At first glance, Stony Littleton Long Barrow seems modest compared to towering stone circles or monumental temples. Yet, beneath this quiet earthwork lies one of Britain's most remarkable Neolithic burial monuments, a place that has preserved its silence for more than 5,000 years. Constructed around 3,500 BC, the barrow stretches nearly 100 feet across the hillside. At its eastern end stands an impressive stone entrance framed by massive limestone slabs. Above the doorway rests a large capstone estimated to weigh several tons, creating a striking portal into the darkness beyond. Passing through the narrow entrance, visitors enter a long central passage lined with carefully placed stone walls, from which a series of small burial chambers branch off on either side. Unlike a single royal tomb, Stony Littleton was built as a communal resting place. Excavations carried out during the 19th century uncovered the remains of at least 24 individuals within its chambers, although many archaeologists believe the original number may have been considerably higher. The dead were placed here over multiple generations, suggesting that the monument served not only as a burial site, but also as a focal point for family identity, ancestry, and ceremonial tradition. The architecture itself reflects remarkable planning. Each chamber appears carefully proportioned, with stone partitions creating separate spaces within the mound. Rather than simply covering burials with earth, the builders invested enormous effort in constructing an enduring monument whose design would survive for millennia. Every stone had to be quarried, transported, and positioned without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or written plans. Yet, despite its impressive construction, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Why did Neolithic communities devote such extraordinary labor to monuments for the dead? Archaeologists generally believe that long barrows served as places where ancestors remained closely connected to the living. Burial ceremonies may have reinforced family ties, territorial claims, and shared identity at a time when farming communities were becoming increasingly settled across the British landscape. The arrangement of the burials adds another layer of intrigue. Evidence suggests that bodies were not always placed intact within the chambers immediately after death. Some researchers propose that the deceased may have undergone complex funerary rituals before selected bones were eventually deposited inside the barrow. Human remains appear to have been carefully arranged, moved, and occasionally reorganized over time, indicating that the chambers remained active ceremonial spaces rather than sealed tombs. What beliefs guided these practices? Without written records, certainty remains impossible. Some archaeologists suggest that separating and arranging bones reflected ideas about ancestry, renewal, or the continuing presence of the dead within the community. Others argue that practical considerations, such as repeated use of limited burial space, may explain the pattern. The evidence allows multiple interpretations, none entirely complete. The monument's orientation has also attracted attention. Like several other Neolithic long barrows in Britain, Stony Littleton faces roughly toward the east. Some researchers have explored possible connections with the rising sun, seasonal cycles, or symbolic ideas concerning rebirth and renewal. While no definitive astronomical alignment has been demonstrated, the consistent orientation of many prehistoric monuments suggests that their builders paid careful attention to the surrounding landscape and the movement of the heavens. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Stony Littleton has inspired generations of local tradition. Folklore has long associated ancient burial mounds with spirits, hidden chambers, and lingering presences connected to the ancestors. Some visitors describe an unusual stillness within the narrow stone passage, while others view the monument simply as an extraordinary example of prehistoric engineering. Such impressions remain matters of personal experience rather than archaeological evidence, yet they illustrate the enduring power these ancient places continue to hold over the imagination. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in the people who built the barrow themselves. They left no names, no written history, and no explanation for the ceremonies performed within these stone chambers. Their voices survive only through architecture, carefully placed bones, and the enduring monument they raised upon the hillside. Standing inside the cool passage today, surrounded by stones that have remained undisturbed for 5,000 years, it becomes clear that Stony Littleton was never intended merely as a place of burial. It was a place of memory, identity, and belief. Yet, despite everything archaeology has uncovered, one quiet question continues to echo through its chambers. What did the builders hope would endure long after they themselves had become part of the monument they created? From the stone chambers of Stony Littleton, where Britain's earliest farming communities honored generations of ancestors beneath a single earthen mound, our journey now crosses to another island nation where burial monuments reached an astonishing scale. Here, remembrance was no longer expressed through modest communal tombs alone, but through vast earthworks visible from the sky. Monuments whose sheer size continues to raise questions about the rulers they were built to honor. Across the plains and river valleys of Japan, enormous earthen mounds rise quietly above modern cities, forests, and farmland. Some are surrounded by broad moats that reflect the changing sky, while others remain covered with dense trees, appearing more like natural hills than human creations. Seen from ground level, they reveal little of their true form. Only from above does their remarkable design become clear. Many are shaped like giant keyholes, consisting of a circular rear mound connected to a trapezoidal front platform, forming one of the most distinctive funerary landscapes anywhere in the world. These are the Kofun burial mounds. Constructed primarily between the 3rd and 7th centuries A.D., they mark a pivotal period in Japanese history when regional leaders gradually consolidated political authority into what would eventually become the early Yamato state. Thousands of kofun survive across Japan, ranging from relatively modest earthworks to immense monuments requiring extraordinary labor and organization. Among them stands one of the largest burial monuments ever built. Traditionally associated with Emperor Nintoku, the Daisen Kofun stretches nearly 500 meters in length, surrounded by multiple moats and embankments that occupy a vast area. Measured by total volume of earth moved, it rivals many of the world's greatest ancient monuments. Yet, despite its immense scale, remarkably little is known about what lies inside. This uncertainty reflects one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the kofun. Many of the largest mounds are regarded as imperial tombs and remain under the protection of Japan's Imperial Household Agency. Because they are considered sacred resting places connected to the imperial lineage, archaeological excavation within their central burial chambers has been extremely limited. As a result, historians possess only fragmentary evidence regarding the individuals buried inside, the objects accompanying them, and the ceremonies performed during their construction. The monuments themselves, however, offer valuable clues. Excavations at smaller kofun have uncovered stone burial chambers containing bronze mirrors, iron weapons, armor, jewelry, horse equipment, and elaborate ceremonial objects imported or influenced by cultures from the Korean peninsula and China. Around many mounds stood rows of haniwa, carefully crafted clay figures depicting warriors, houses, animals, musicians, and attendants. Rather than serving as simple decoration, these figures likely held ceremonial or symbolic significance, though their precise purpose remains debated. Some researchers believe the haniwa marked sacred boundaries separating the world of the living from the realm of the dead. Others suggest they represented members of society, protective guardians, or offerings intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. Without contemporary written explanations, every interpretation remains necessarily cautious. The construction of the largest kofun raises equally fascinating questions. Building monuments of such enormous size would have required thousands of laborers, sophisticated planning, and centralized leadership capable of organizing resources over extended periods. These projects suggest that powerful political structures were already emerging in Japan centuries before many detailed historical records begin. Yet exactly how authority functioned during this formative era remains only partially understood. Who were the individuals buried beneath these monumental mounds? Traditional historical sources attribute many kofun to early emperors, but the chronology of Japan's earliest rulers remains difficult to establish with certainty. Because direct archaeological investigation has been limited at several key sites, historians must balance later written traditions with material evidence recovered elsewhere. This has left important questions about the identities, relationships, and historical roles of these rulers still open to discussion. Beyond mainstream archaeology, the immense scale and restricted access of the imperial kofun have naturally encouraged speculation. Some have imagined undiscovered treasures, exceptionally preserved burial chambers, or inscriptions capable of transforming our understanding of Japan's earliest history. Others suggest that future non-invasive technologies, such as advanced ground-penetrating surveys or remote sensing, may eventually reveal new information without disturbing the sacred sites themselves. For now, however, such possibilities remain matters of careful anticipation rather than established fact. Standing beside one of these great mounds today, surrounded by quiet forests and still waters, it is easy to forget that an entire ceremonial landscape lies concealed beneath the earth. The trees conceal carefully engineered terraces, ancient burial chambers, and the resting places of figures who helped shape the earliest chapters of Japanese history. Yet, because many of these monuments remain respectfully untouched, they continue to preserve one of archaeology's rarest forms of mystery, not a site that has been forgotten, but one that has been deliberately left unopened, inviting future generations to wonder what knowledge still rests within their silent hills. From the immense Kofun mounds of Japan, where entire hills conceal the resting places of rulers, our journey now turns toward another landscape where history is preserved beneath the surface. This time, the mystery lies not within monumental tombs, but beneath the ruins of an ancient settlement, where hidden chambers and underground passages hint at lives shaped by faith, survival, and changing civilizations. Across the windswept plateau of central Jordan, the ruins of ar-Rasas rise quietly from the desert. Low stone walls outline the remains of churches, homes, courtyards, and defensive structures that once formed a thriving community at the crossroads of empires. The site, known in Roman times as Castron Mefa'a, flourished during the Roman, Byzantine, and early Islamic periods, serving first as a military outpost before developing into an important religious center. Yet some of its most intriguing features remain almost invisible, concealed beneath the ground. Beneath the settlement lies a network of underground spaces whose original purpose continues to invite investigation. Some chambers were carved directly into the bedrock, while others were adapted over centuries as the settlement expanded and changed. Narrow stairways descend into cool subterranean rooms where daylight quickly fades, revealing storage areas, cisterns, hidden passages, and chambers that may have served multiple purposes throughout different periods of occupation. The environment itself helps explain part of their existence. In this dry landscape, water determined survival. Carefully engineered cisterns collected seasonal rainfall, preserving precious supplies through long months of heat. Underground storage also protected food from extreme temperatures while offering secure places for valuable goods. Many archaeologists believe that at least some of the subterranean spaces were practical responses to the demands of daily life rather than mysterious constructions. Yet, not every chamber is so easily understood. Excavations have revealed evidence suggesting that certain underground rooms may have been adapted for religious use or temporary refuge. During periods of political uncertainty, invasion, or regional conflict, hidden spaces beneath settlements often provided protection for both people and treasured possessions. Whether every chamber at ar-Rasas served such a function remains uncertain, but the possibility reflects the complex history of a region repeatedly shaped by changing empires. Above ground, the site is best known for its remarkable churches and exceptionally well-preserved mosaic floors. Among the most celebrated discoveries is the mosaic of the Church of St. Stephen, completed in AD 785. Its intricate images depict towns, landscapes, animals, and geographical locations across the eastern Mediterranean, offering an extraordinary glimpse into the cultural world of the early Byzantine and Umayyad periods. These mosaics demonstrate that ar-Rasas remained an active and prosperous community, even as political authority shifted from Byzantine to early Islamic rule. The contrast between the richly decorated churches above and the hidden chambers below raises compelling questions. How closely were these underground spaces connected with the settlement's religious life? Did monks retreat into secluded rooms for prayer and contemplation? Were valuable manuscripts, sacred objects, or supplies stored below during times of danger? Archaeological evidence supports several possibilities, but does not provide definitive answers for every structure. The site's gradual decline presents another enduring mystery. Historical evidence suggests that earthquakes, shifting trade routes, and broader regional changes contributed to the settlement's eventual abandonment. Like many communities throughout the Near East, ar-Rasas experienced centuries of adaptation before slowly fading from prominence. Some buildings collapsed naturally, while others were dismantled as later populations reused stone for new construction. Over time, wind-blown sand and silence reclaimed much of the settlement. Beyond mainstream archaeology, the underground chambers have occasionally inspired more speculative interpretations. Some have suggested the existence of undiscovered tunnels linking distant parts of the settlement, while others have proposed that deeper sections remain unexplored beneath collapsed debris. Although no convincing evidence currently supports extensive hidden networks, archaeologists continue to identify previously unknown features through careful excavation and non-invasive survey techniques. Each new discovery reminds researchers that the underground landscape is still only partly understood. Perhaps the greatest mystery is how many generations quietly passed through these hidden spaces without leaving written accounts of their purpose. Every carved stairway, every concealed chamber, and every underground reservoir reflects practical knowledge shaped by centuries of experience. Yet, much of that knowledge has disappeared along with the people who created it. Standing among the ruins of ar-Rasas today, it is easy to admire the sunlit mosaics and weathered churches that define the visible city. But beneath those familiar remains lies another world, carved into the earth and protected by time itself. There, in the cool darkness below the desert, unanswered questions continue to wait, suggesting that some of the settlement's most revealing chapters may still remain hidden beneath the stones. From the hidden chambers beneath ar-Rasas, where entire chapters of history remain concealed below the desert floor, our journey now follows the ancient trade routes that once connected continents. This time, the mystery is carried not by underground passages or forgotten tombs, but by a harbor that linked Africa, Arabia, the Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean. Today, only scattered ruins remain, yet, for centuries, the port of Adulis stood at the center of one of the ancient world's most remarkable maritime networks. Along the western shore of the Red Sea, where arid coastal plains meet brilliant blue water, the remains of Adulis lie beneath layers of sand and stone in present-day Eritrea. The landscape appears quiet now, interrupted only by low mounds, scattered masonry, and fragments of weathered walls. Yet, nearly 2,000 years ago, this coastline echoed with the sounds of merchants unloading cargo, sailors preparing vessels for distant voyages, and travelers speaking languages from every corner of the known world. Adulis was no ordinary port. From at least the 1st century A.D., it served as the principal maritime gateway of the kingdom of Aksum, one of the most influential civilizations of late antiquity. Ancient writers described it as a thriving commercial center, where goods from Africa, Arabia, India, and the Roman Empire converged before continuing their journeys across continents. Ivory, gold, rhinoceros horn, tortoise shell, incense, spices, textiles, glassware, metalwork, and exotic animals all passed through its harbor, transforming Adulis into a crossroads of global exchange centuries before the medieval trading empires emerged. One of the earliest surviving descriptions comes from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek-speaking merchant's guide written during the 1st century A.D. The text portrays Adulis as a busy harbor connected to inland markets through caravan routes that cross the Ethiopian highlands and reach the powerful kingdom of Aksum. Later historians, including Cosmas Indicopleustes during the 6th century, also recorded visits to the city, describing monuments, inscriptions, and thriving commercial activity. These written accounts paint a picture of extraordinary prosperity. Ships arriving from Egypt sailed south through the Red Sea before reaching Adulis, where merchants exchanged Mediterranean goods for products originating deep within Africa. At the same time, vessels traveling from southern Arabia and the Indian Ocean contributed commodities from regions extending as far as India and Sri Lanka. Long before modern globalization, Adulis had become an international meeting point where distant cultures interacted through trade rather than conquest. Yet, despite its importance, remarkably little of the city survives above ground. Archaeological excavations have uncovered substantial stone buildings, warehouses, residential quarters, imported ceramics, coins from multiple civilizations, and fragments of monumental architecture. These discoveries confirmed that Adulis was both prosperous and cosmopolitan. Even so, only portions of the ancient settlement have been systematically investigated, leaving much of the site still unexplored beneath accumulated sediment. One enduring mystery concerns the city's exact appearance during its height. Ancient descriptions suggest an impressive urban center, yet archaeologists have uncovered only fragments of what once stood there. Wooden harbor installations have long since disappeared, while changing coastlines, erosion, earthquakes, and centuries of stone reuse have altered the landscape dramatically. Reconstructing the original harbor remains one of the greatest challenges facing researchers. Where exactly did the great merchant ships anchor? How extensive were the docks, warehouses, and marketplaces that once supported international commerce? The answers remain uncertain because the coastline itself has changed over nearly 2,000 years. Geological processes, shifting sediments, and fluctuations in sea level may have altered the ancient shoreline, placing portions of the original harbor beneath later deposits or offshore environments that have yet to be fully examined. Another fascinating puzzle concerns Adulis' relationship with the kingdom of Axum. The inland capital at Axum became one of the great powers of late antiquity, minting its own coins, adopting Christianity during the 4th century, and maintaining diplomatic relations with Rome, Persia, and neighboring kingdoms. Adulis functioned as its maritime lifeline, connecting inland political authority with international trade. Yet, relatively little survives to explain exactly how the port was administered, or how merchants from vastly different cultures interacted within its markets. The city also witnessed periods of remarkable historical change. During the 6th century, the kingdom of Axum launched military expeditions across the Red Sea into southern Arabia, demonstrating the strategic importance of its naval connections. At its height, Adulis likely played a vital logistical role in supporting these campaigns. However, by the early medieval period, its prominence gradually declined. Why did such an important harbor disappear from history? Historians have proposed several explanations. Shifting trade routes may have redirected commercial traffic toward other ports as political conditions changed throughout the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Environmental changes could have affected harbor access or freshwater supplies. Regional conflicts may also have weakened the infrastructure supporting long-distance commerce. Some scholars point to the rise of new maritime powers during the 7th and 8th centuries, which transformed established trading networks throughout the region. Rather than one sudden catastrophe, Adulis appears to have experienced a gradual fading of influence. Even this process remains difficult to reconstruct because historical records become increasingly scarce. Once bustling streets slowly emptied, warehouses fell into disuse, and monumental buildings collapsed through neglect. Over centuries, drifting sand and changing landscapes concealed much of the city that had once welcomed merchants from across the ancient world. The archaeological discoveries themselves continue to raise important questions. Imported pottery from the Mediterranean stands beside locally produced ceramics. Roman coins appear alongside Axumite currency. Glass vessels, metal tools, jewelry, and architectural fragments illustrate an astonishing mixture of cultural influences. These objects reveal not simply commercial exchange, but the movement of ideas, technologies, artistic traditions, and religious beliefs between distant societies. Yet, many aspects of daily life remain invisible. Who lived permanently within Adulis? How many languages echoed through its marketplaces? What agreements governed trade between merchants arriving from different kingdoms? How were disputes resolved in such an international environment? Without surviving administrative archives, historians can answer these questions only indirectly through archaeology. Beyond mainstream scholarship, Adulis has inspired more speculative theories. Some writers have suggested that significant portions of the ancient harbor still lie buried beneath unexplored coastal sediments, awaiting future excavation. Others have proposed that offshore remains may survive beneath the waters of the Red Sea, preserved beneath layers of silt deposited over centuries. Marine archaeological surveys continue to investigate these possibilities, although definitive evidence remains limited. There have also been broader claims connecting Adulis with legendary trading expeditions described in ancient traditions. Because the port occupied such a strategic position between Africa, Arabia, and the wider Indian Ocean, some have suggested it played a role in voyages whose details have since passed into legend. While its importance as a major commercial hub is well established, direct evidence linking Adulis to many of these legendary narratives remains elusive. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not simply why Adulis disappeared, but how a city that once stood at the center of global commerce could fade so completely from collective memory. For centuries, countless ships entered its harbor carrying goods, languages, beliefs, and travelers whose journeys reshaped civilizations far beyond the Red Sea. Today, the waves still reach the same coastline, but the harbor itself has fallen silent. Standing among the scattered stones of Adulis, where the desert gradually reclaims streets once filled with merchants from distant lands, it becomes clear that history often leaves behind only fragments of its greatest crossroads. Beneath the sand may still rest warehouses untouched by excavation, inscriptions waiting to be deciphered, and evidence capable of revealing how one forgotten port connected much of the ancient world. Until those discoveries emerge, Adulis remains suspended between archaeology and memory, quietly reminding us that some of history's most influential places are also among its least completely understood. From the abandoned quays of Adulis, where merchant ships once connected continents before the harbor gradually faded into silence, our journey now turns toward another place shaped by memory rather than commerce. Here, the traces of an ancient society are not scattered across marketplaces or city streets, but carved directly into towering cliffs. Thousands of burial chambers overlook deep river valleys, preserving the legacy of a people whose customs can still be studied, yet whose full story continues to resist complete understanding. In the rugged hills of southeastern Sicily, where limestone cliffs rise above the winding Anapo and Calcanara rivers, an extraordinary landscape stretches across the valleys. At first, the rock faces appear untouched by human hands, softened by centuries of vegetation and weather. But as sunlight shifts across the stone, countless dark openings begin to emerge. They are not natural caves. They are carefully carved tombs, thousands of them, cut into the cliffs with remarkable precision over 3,000 years ago. This is the Necropolis of Pantalica. Containing more than 5,000 rock-cut tombs scattered across steep limestone escarpments, Pantalica ranks among the largest prehistoric burial complexes in Europe. The cemetery developed primarily between the 13th and 8th centuries BC, during the Late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, long before the rise of classical Greek cities that would later transform Sicily. The people who created these tombs belonged to indigenous Sicilian communities whose culture flourished during a period of significant political and social change throughout the central Mediterranean. The setting itself immediately invites curiosity. Unlike many ancient cemeteries built upon level ground, Pantalica occupies an almost naturally fortified plateau, surrounded by dramatic ravines. Narrow paths descend toward rivers below, while steep cliffs provide commanding views across the surrounding countryside. The landscape offered both security and isolation, making it an ideal location for a thriving settlement as well as an immense cemetery that remained visible for generations. Archaeologists believe the settlement above the cliffs once supported a substantial population. Excavations have uncovered the remains of dwellings, defensive walls, workshops, and evidence of metalworking, suggesting a community that participated in the broader exchange networks connecting the Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. Pottery styles reveal contact with neighboring regions, while bronze tools and weapons demonstrate considerable technical skill. Yet, it is the cemetery that dominates every discussion of Pantalica. The tombs themselves are relatively small. Most consist of oval or circular chambers carved directly into the limestone, entered through narrow openings just large enough to allow the deceased to be placed inside. Some cliff faces contain dozens of tombs stacked one above another, creating remarkable patterns across the rock that resemble honeycombs when viewed from a distance. Constructing such an enormous necropolis required extraordinary effort. Every chamber had to be cut using stone and bronze tools, often in locations that remain difficult to access even today. The sheer number of tombs suggests centuries of continuous use by successive generations. Rather than serving isolated individuals, the necropolis reflects an entire society's relationship with death, ancestry, and collective identity. But fundamental questions remain unanswered. Who exactly were the people of Pantalica? Although archaeologists have identified their material culture, no written records survive describing their language, political organization, or religious beliefs. Their names have disappeared from history. Everything known about them must be reconstructed through artifacts, architecture, and careful analysis of the landscape they left behind. The tombs provide valuable clues. Excavations have uncovered pottery vessels, bronze ornaments, fibulae, weapons, tools, beads, and personal items placed beside the dead. These objects reveal distinctions in wealth and status, suggesting that some individuals occupied more prominent positions within society than others. Yet, compared with the elaborate royal burials of Egypt or Mycenaean Greece, the graves remain relatively restrained. This contrast raises intriguing possibilities. Did the people of Pantalica value communal identity more than displays of individual power? Or have centuries of ancient looting removed many of the richest grave goods before archaeologists ever reached the site? Tomb robbery occurred throughout antiquity, and evidence suggests that numerous chambers were disturbed long before modern excavation began. The settlement's location also continues to inspire debate. Many historians believe communities gradually moved inland during the Late Bronze Age in response to growing insecurity along the coast. Maritime trade brought prosperity, but it also increased the risk of raids by seafaring groups during a period marked by widespread political instability throughout the Mediterranean. Establishing settlements within naturally defensible landscapes like Pantalica may have offered greater protection. Others emphasize environmental considerations. The surrounding valleys provided reliable water sources, fertile agricultural land, and abundant natural resources, while the elevated plateau offered commanding views of approaching visitors. Rather than fleeing danger alone, the inhabitants may simply have chosen one of the most practical and sustainable locations available. Neither explanation fully accounts for every aspect of the site. Another enduring mystery concerns the relationship between the living settlement and the immense cemetery surrounding it. The dead were never placed far from daily life. Instead, generations lived within sight of thousands of ancestral tombs carved into the cliffs surrounding their homes. Was this constant visual presence intended to strengthen family memory? Did ancestors occupy an active role in community life long after death? Or did the surrounding cliffs themselves possess sacred significance independent of the burials? Without written testimony, certainty remains impossible. The history of Pantalica becomes even more complex during later centuries. As Greek colonies expanded across Sicily beginning in the 8th century BC, indigenous societies experienced profound cultural transformation. Trade intensified, new technologies spread, and political relationships shifted dramatically. Many communities gradually adopted elements of Greek material culture while preserving aspects of older traditions. Pantalica itself eventually declined, although portions of the landscape remained occupied during later periods, including Byzantine times, when some ancient tombs were adapted as dwellings, chapels, and hermitages. These later occupations created an extraordinary layering of history. Bronze Age burial chambers became medieval places of worship. Ancient pathways evolved into pilgrimage routes. Successive generations reused the same landscape for entirely different purposes, often leaving behind evidence that overlaps in fascinating but sometimes confusing ways. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Pantalica has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some researchers have explored whether the arrangement of particular tomb clusters reflects social organization based upon extended family groups or clans. Others have examined possible symbolic relationships between the cemetery, surrounding rivers, and seasonal movements of the sun. While intriguing patterns have been proposed, no definitive evidence confirms intentional astronomical planning across the necropolis as a whole. Local traditions have also contributed their own interpretations over the centuries. The countless openings scattered across the cliffs naturally encouraged stories of hidden chambers, forgotten treasures, and unexplored passageways extending deep within the mountains. Archaeological investigations have found no evidence supporting vast underground labyrinths, yet the scale of the necropolis continues to create the impression that much of its story remains concealed within the landscape itself. Modern research continues to reveal new insights through technologies unavailable to earlier archaeologists. High-resolution aerial mapping, digital terrain modeling, and refined dating techniques have improved understanding of how the cemetery developed over time. Even so, many tombs remain only partially studied, while the broader social world of the people who created them remains frustratingly incomplete. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not the purpose of any single tomb, but the remarkable civilization capable of transforming an entire mountainside into a lasting monument to memory. For centuries, families climbed these cliffs to bury their dead, returning again and again to the same sun chambers while the living settlement continued above. Children grew into adults beneath the silent gaze of thousands of ancestral tombs, surrounded every day by visible reminders of those who came before them. Standing today among the limestone cliffs of Pantalica, where birds circle above valleys carved by rivers over countless millennia, the countless dark openings still watch silently from the rock. Each doorway once marked a life, a family, and a story now almost entirely erased. Archaeology has recovered fragments of that world, yet the people behind those thousands of carefully carved chambers remain largely anonymous. From the towering cliffs of Pantalica, where thousands of silent tombs preserve the memory of a vanished Bronze Age society, our journey now follows another path into the ancient world, one carved not for the dead alone, but for the gods themselves. Here, towering rock walls became sacred galleries, their surfaces transformed into processions of divine figures whose purpose continues to inspire debate more than 3,000 years after they were first carved. Just beyond the ancient Hittite capital of Hattusa, in what is now central Turkey, a narrow passage opens between towering limestone outcrops. At first, the site appears almost accidental, as though nature simply split the bedrock and left behind a quiet sanctuary hidden among the hills. But as visitors move deeper into the rock corridors, the stone begins to change. Every surface comes alive with carefully carved figures. Kings stand beside gods. Winged creatures stride across the cliffs. Divine processions emerge from both directions before meeting in a carefully orchestrated scene unlike anything else preserved from the Hittite world. This is Yazilikaya, one of the most remarkable religious monuments of the Late Bronze Age. The sanctuary reached its greatest importance during the 13th century BC, particularly under the reigns of Hattusili III and his son Tudhaliya IV. Rather than constructing a temple enclosed by walls and roofs, Hittite builders chose an open-air sanctuary where natural rock formations became part of the sacred design itself. The result is a place where architecture and landscape merge so completely that it becomes difficult to separate human intention from the surrounding geology. The sanctuary consists primarily of two rock chambers, known today as Chamber A and Chamber B. Within Chamber A, more than 90 carved figures stretch across the limestone walls in one of the most extensive surviving displays of Hittite religious art. Male deities advance in orderly procession from one side, while female deities approach from the opposite direction. At the center, the storm god Tishub meets the sun goddess Hebat in a symbolic encounter that appears to represent cosmic balance, royal legitimacy, or perhaps the ordered structure of the universe itself. Every figure is rendered with remarkable precision. Distinctive clothing, elaborate headdresses, weapons, animals, and symbolic attributes identify individual gods within the Hittite pantheon. Some stand upon mountain peaks personified as deities, while others balance atop lions, leopards, or mythical creatures. The carvings display not only exceptional artistic skill, but also an extraordinary effort to organize religious ideas into a carefully planned visual narrative. Yet, despite more than a century of archaeological study, the sanctuary's complete purpose remains uncertain. Most historians agree that Yazilikaya functioned as an important ceremonial center connected to the nearby royal capital. Religious festivals almost certainly took place here, with priests, officials, and members of the royal family participating in rituals honoring the Hittite gods. Inscriptions and historical records indicate that Hittite kings viewed themselves as intermediaries between humanity and the divine, making sanctuaries like Yazilikaya central to both religion and royal authority. Even so, many details remain elusive. Why was an open-air sanctuary preferred over an enclosed temple? Some researchers suggest that the natural rock formations themselves possessed sacred significance long before the carvings were created. Springs, caves, mountains, and unusual geological formations frequently held religious importance throughout the ancient Near East. Rather than imposing architecture upon the landscape, the builders may have sought to reveal the sacred qualities they already believed existed within the stone. The arrangement of the carvings introduces another fascinating layer of complexity. The divine processions appear highly organized rather than decorative. Individual figures occupy deliberate positions relative to one another, and repeated symbols suggest carefully structured theological concepts. For decades, archaeologists interpreted the carvings primarily as representations of the Hittite pantheon assembled for ceremonial worship. More recently, however, additional interpretations have emerged. Some scholars have proposed that the sequence of deities may also reflect aspects of the Hittite calendar. According to this view, groups of figures correspond symbolically to lunar cycles, seasonal changes, or ritual festivals observed throughout the year. Certain numerical patterns within the reliefs have attracted particular attention, leading researchers to explore whether the sanctuary functioned not only as a religious monument, but also as a symbolic representation of cosmic time. This interpretation remains the subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. While intriguing numerical relationships exist among several groups of carvings, many historians caution that symbolic meaning within ancient religious art is often difficult to reconstruct with certainty. The Hittites left written ritual texts describing numerous ceremonies, yet none explicitly explain every feature of Yazilikai's design. As a result, archaeological evidence, iconographic analysis, and textual interpretation must be combined carefully without forcing conclusions unsupported by the available evidence. Chamber B presents an even more enigmatic atmosphere. Smaller and more secluded than the main sanctuary, it contains striking reliefs unlike those found elsewhere at the site. Here, the god Sharuma embraces King Tudalia IV in an image often interpreted as divine protection or royal legitimacy. Nearby stand a remarkable series of sword gods emerging from the ground, their hilts formed by human heads and their blades extending downward into the earth. These unusual figures have fascinated researchers for generations. Some archaeologists associate Chamber B with funerary rituals connected to the royal family, perhaps honoring deceased kings who had entered the company of the gods. Others suggest it served as a place for ceremonies emphasizing rebirth, transformation, or communication between earthly and divine realms. Once again, the surviving evidence allows multiple interpretations while refusing to settle definitively upon a single explanation. The sanctuary also reflects the remarkable diversity of Hittite religion. Rather than worshipping a small number of deities, the Hittites incorporated gods from many neighboring cultures, including Hurrian, Anatolian, Mesopotamian, and Syrian traditions. Ancient texts even refer to the Hittite realm as the land of 1,000 gods. Yazilikaya captures this remarkable religious synthesis, preserving a visual record of beliefs shaped through centuries of cultural interaction across the ancient Near East. Its survival is remarkable in itself. When the Hittite Empire collapsed around the early 12th century BC during the wider upheavals that transformed the eastern Mediterranean, Hattusa was abandoned. Palaces fell into ruin, archives were buried beneath collapsed walls, and political authority disappeared. Yet Yazilikaya remained, protected by the enduring strength of the surrounding limestone. Long after the empire vanished, the gods continued to stand silently within their natural sanctuary. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Yazilikaya has naturally inspired more speculative ideas. Its apparent numerical organization has encouraged suggestions that the sanctuary encoded advanced astronomical knowledge extending far beyond ceremonial calendars. Others have proposed that the carvings preserve symbolic maps of the heavens or reflect sophisticated cosmological systems now only partially understood. While recent research has strengthened interest in possible astronomical symbolism, most specialists emphasize that these ideas remain hypotheses rather than established historical fact. The sanctuary undoubtedly reflects complex religious thought, but the full extent of its symbolic meaning continues to be investigated. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether Yazilikaya functioned as a temple, a ceremonial calendar, or a symbolic representation of the cosmos. It may have served all of these purposes simultaneously within a worldview that drew no sharp distinction between religion, astronomy, kingship, and the natural landscape. For the Hittites, observing the heavens, honoring the gods, and maintaining political order may have formed parts of a single, interconnected system. Standing within the narrow stone corridors today, surrounded by divine figures that have watched over the sanctuary for more than 3,000 years, there is an unmistakable sense that the carvings still preserve meanings not yet fully recovered. Their faces remain clear. Their processions remain intact. Yet the language of symbols through which they once spoke has only partly survived. Somewhere within those silent lines of gods and kings may still lie a forgotten key to understanding one of the Bronze Age's most sophisticated civilizations, and a worldview whose deepest meanings remain carved into the living rock, waiting to be understood once again. From the sacred stone corridors of Yazilikaya, Where processions of gods still stand frozen upon the cliffs of ancient Anatolia, our journey now crosses an ocean to another civilization that also sought to understand the relationship between the heavens, the earth, and human existence. Here, the monuments rise not from narrow rock sanctuaries but from the flat limestone plains of the Yucatan Peninsula, where an ancient city flourished for centuries before gradually fading into silence. Yet, beneath its temples and plazas lies a mystery rooted not only in architecture, but in water, astronomy, and one of the longest continuous occupations in the Maya world. Surrounded by dense tropical vegetation in the northern Yucatan of present-day Mexico, the ancient city of Gibil Chaltun appears almost understated when compared with the towering pyramids of Chichen Itza, or Tikal. Low stone walls emerge quietly from the forest floor. Broad causeways stretch across the landscape, linking plazas, temples, and residential districts that once formed a thriving urban center. Birds move through the canopy above, while beneath the limestone surface, an unseen network of groundwater has sustained life here for thousands of years. The Maya gave enormous importance to water, and nowhere is that dependence more apparent than at Gibil Chaltun. Unlike regions blessed with permanent rivers, northern Yucatan relies almost entirely upon underground freshwater stored within natural limestone formations. The city developed around one of the largest and most reliable cenotes in the region, the Ixtlaca cenote, a vast natural sinkhole filled with remarkably clear water. Even today, its still surface reflects the surrounding trees, concealing depths that descend far below the visible shoreline. For ancient inhabitants, this was far more than a convenient water source. The cenote made permanent settlement possible in an environment where reliable freshwater was often scarce. It supported agriculture, daily life, trade, and population growth over many centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests that Gibil Chaltun was occupied from around 500 BC and continued to flourish well into the period following European contact, making it one of the longest continuously inhabited Maya cities yet discovered. Its remarkable longevity immediately raises important questions. How did one settlement remain viable while many other Maya cities experienced dramatic cycles of expansion and decline? Archaeologists believe geography played a decisive role. Gibil Chaltun occupied an advantageous position along important trade routes connecting the Gulf Coast with the Caribbean and the interior of the Yucatan Peninsula. Salt, obsidian, ceramics, textiles, marine products, jade, and other valuable goods likely passed through the city, allowing it to prosper through commerce as well as agriculture. Excavations reveal an urban landscape of surprising scale. Researchers estimate that the city may once have covered more than 20 square kilometers, containing thousands of structures spread across an extensive network of roads known as sakbiob, raised limestone causeways connecting neighborhoods, ceremonial centers, and surrounding communities. Rather than concentrating its population within a compact ceremonial core, Gibil Chaltun expanded across a broad area, suggesting careful adaptation to available land and water resources. At the heart of the site stands one of its most celebrated buildings. Known today as the Temple of the Seven Dolls, the structure derives its modern name from 7 small clay figurines discovered inside during excavations. These unusual figures possess elongated features and simplified human forms, unlike many other known Maya sculptures. Their exact purpose remains uncertain. Were they ritual offerings placed during the temple's dedication? Did they represent ancestors, deities, or symbolic participants in ceremonies once performed within the sanctuary? Archaeologists cannot answer with confidence. The figurines remain among the site's most intriguing discoveries precisely because they resist simple explanation. The temple itself displays another remarkable characteristic. Twice each year, During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the rising sun aligns almost perfectly with the building's eastern doorway. As dawn breaks, sunlight passes directly through the temple, illuminating its interior before continuing westward across the surrounding plaza. Modern visitors gathered to witness the event, watching as architecture and astronomy combine in a carefully orchestrated display. This alignment has naturally attracted considerable scholarly attention. Many archaeologists interpret it as evidence of sophisticated astronomical observation integrated into ceremonial architecture. The Maya developed highly accurate calendars based upon careful tracking of solar, lunar, and planetary cycles. Aligning important buildings with celestial events would have reinforced agricultural timing, ritual calendars, and broader cosmological beliefs linking the heavens with earthly life. Yet, even here, caution remains important. Not every architectural alignment necessarily functioned as an astronomical observatory in the modern sense. Some scholars argue that symbolic relationships between buildings and celestial events carried greater religious significance than scientific measurement alone. For the Maya, observing the movement of the sun was inseparable from maintaining cosmic order, organizing ceremonial life, and affirming the authority of rulers and priests. The city contains further evidence of remarkable planning. Residential districts, ceremonial plazas, defensive walls, reservoirs, and marketplaces reveal a society that balanced religious activity with practical administration. Stone inscriptions, pottery, ornaments, and imported materials demonstrate connections extending across much of the Maya world. Although Jibil Chaltun never achieved the monumental scale of certain larger capitals, its influence appears to have rested upon stability, trade, and strategic location rather than imperial expansion. Even so, significant mysteries remain. Unlike several better documented Maya cities, relatively few hieroglyphic inscriptions have survived at Jibil Chaltun. Without abundant royal monuments or lengthy historical texts, reconstructing its political history becomes far more difficult. The names of many rulers remain unknown. Diplomatic relationships with neighboring kingdoms must often be inferred indirectly through ceramics, architecture, and trade goods rather than written records. Another enduring question concerns the city's extraordinary endurance. Many major Maya centers experienced periods of dramatic decline during the 9th and 10th centuries AD, often associated with environmental stress, warfare, shifting political alliances, or economic transformation. Jibil Chaltun, however, appears to have remained occupied considerably longer than many neighboring cities. Why? Its dependable water supply almost certainly contributed to long-term resilience. Access to coastal trade may also have provided economic flexibility during periods of regional instability. Yet, these explanations alone may not fully account for the settlement's remarkable continuity. Archaeologists continue to investigate how local environmental management, agricultural practices, and political adaptation allowed the community to survive changing circumstances that challenged many other Maya centers. The Exlaca cenote itself deepens the mystery. Underwater archaeological investigations have recovered pottery, stone tools, ornaments, human remains, and ritual offerings deposited over many centuries. Like other sacred cenotes throughout the Maya world, Exlaca appears to have served both practical and ceremonial functions simultaneously. Water sustained physical life while also representing a sacred gateway associated with creation, fertility, and communication with divine powers. Exactly how these ceremonies unfolded remains uncertain. Some offerings may have accompanied seasonal rituals connected with rainfall and agricultural renewal. Others could represent funerary practices, acts of thanksgiving, or petitions made during periods of drought. The archaeological evidence confirms repeated ritual activity, but cannot fully recover the prayers, songs, and beliefs that once gave these ceremonies meaning. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Jebel Chaltun has inspired numerous speculative interpretations. The Temple of the Seven Dolls has occasionally been described as containing hidden astronomical codes or symbolic knowledge extending beyond currently accepted interpretations. Others have suggested that unexplored sections of the city's extensive causeway system may conceal additional ceremonial complexes still hidden beneath dense vegetation. While ongoing excavations continue to reveal previously unknown structures, many dramatic claims remain unsupported by convincing evidence. Modern technologies are nevertheless transforming our understanding of the site. Airborne laser scanning, or LiDAR, has revealed architectural features concealed beneath forest cover, mapping roads, residential platforms, and construction invisible from ground level. These discoveries demonstrate that Jebel Chaltun was considerably larger and more interconnected than earlier surveys suggested. Yet, every new map seems to generate as many questions as answers, revealing patterns whose social and political significance researchers are only beginning to understand. From the sunlit temples and sacred waters of Jebel Chaltun, where architecture, astronomy, and ritual blended into a carefully ordered world, our journey now returns to the eastern Mediterranean, where history survives not only in stone, but in words. This time, the mystery is preserved on thousands of clay tablets, letters, treaties, myths, and administrative records that once filled the shelves of a royal archive. Together, they offer one of the clearest windows into the late Bronze Age, while at the same time leaving behind questions that continue to challenge historians. On the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Syria, a low mound known as Ras Shamra rises quietly above the surrounding plain. Nothing about its appearance immediately suggests that it once held one of the most sophisticated cities of the ancient Near East. The sea still lies only a short distance away, and the fertile countryside continues to support agriculture much as it did more than 3,000 years ago. Yet, beneath this unassuming hill rested the city of Ugarit, a thriving kingdom whose influence reached far beyond its modest size. Unlike many ancient capitals remembered for vast temples or colossal monuments, Ugarit's greatest treasure was hidden inside its buildings. Within the royal palace and surrounding administrative quarters stood carefully organized archives containing thousands of clay tablets. Stored on shelves, arranged within rooms, and written by highly trained scribes, these records documented diplomacy, trade, taxation, religion, literature, education, and daily administration. When archaeologists began excavating the site in 1929, they uncovered one of the richest collections of written material ever discovered from the late Bronze Age. The archives immediately transformed the study of ancient history. Before their discovery, historians knew relatively little about the political and cultural life of many Eastern Mediterranean societies during the 13th and 12th centuries BC. Ugarit's tablets suddenly revealed correspondence between kings, merchants, priests, governors, and foreign rulers, preserving voices that had remained silent for more than 3 millennia. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery was linguistic. Among the thousands of texts appeared an alphabetic cuneiform script, unlike the better-known syllabic writing systems used in Mesopotamia. Instead of requiring hundreds of signs, Ugaritic employed approximately 30 alphabetic symbols impressed into clay with a stylus. This represented one of the earliest known alphabetic writing systems, demonstrating an extraordinary innovation in written communication. Why such a writing system emerged remains an important question. Some scholars believe it reflected the practical needs of a cosmopolitan trading city, where merchants and administrators required an efficient method for recording information. Others suggest it developed within scholarly circles attached to the royal court, combining familiar cuneiform techniques with a fundamentally different linguistic approach. Whatever its precise origin, The script represents a remarkable intellectual achievement. The diversity of the archives is equally impressive. Diplomatic correspondence reveals communication with neighboring kingdoms, including the Hittite Empire, Egypt, Cyprus, and cities throughout the Levant. Commercial records list shipments of grain, wine, copper, textiles, timber, and luxury goods moving through the kingdom's ports. Legal documents preserve contracts, inheritances, and disputes between ordinary citizens. School exercises demonstrate how apprentice scribes learned their craft. Alongside these practical records stand some of the ancient world's greatest literary works. Among the most celebrated are the mythological texts describing Baal, El, Anat, Mot, and other deities central to Canaanite religion. These compositions illuminate a sophisticated religious tradition whose influence extended throughout the broader region. They describe struggles between divine forces representing fertility, drought, kingship, life, and death, providing invaluable insight into beliefs that shaped the spiritual landscape of the Late Bronze Age. Yet, despite the extraordinary preservation of these texts, many mysteries remain. The city itself met a sudden and violent end around the early 12th century BC during the wider collapse that affected much of the eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence reveals widespread destruction by fire. Buildings collapsed. Roofs fell inward. The archives themselves were buried beneath debris, their clay tablets accidentally preserved because intense heat baked them into durable ceramic. Ironically, catastrophe ensured their survival. Had the city remained occupied, many tablets might eventually have been recycled, discarded, or destroyed through ordinary use. Instead, the destruction sealed entire rooms exactly where scribes had left them, preserving an archaeological snapshot, unlike almost any other from the Bronze Age. The cause of Ugarit's destruction remains one of archaeology's most enduring questions. Ancient letters recovered from the archives paint a picture of growing anxiety during the city's final years. One famous message appeals urgently for military assistance, while enemy forces threaten nearby territories. Another refers to ships appearing unexpectedly along the coast. These documents provide rare contemporary testimony from individuals living through a period of extraordinary instability. Who were these enemies? For generations, historians have associated the destruction with the so-called Sea Peoples, maritime groups recorded in Egyptian inscriptions during roughly the same period. Some scholars believe Ugarit fell during raids carried out by these seaborne forces as political systems throughout the eastern Mediterranean unraveled. Yet, the evidence is more complex than a single invasion. Earthquakes may have struck portions of the region around the same time. Climate change has been proposed as a contributing factor, with prolonged drought affecting agriculture and economic stability. Internal political tensions, disrupted trade networks, and the weakening of major empires such as the Hittites may all have combined to create conditions in which even prosperous cities became increasingly vulnerable. Rather than one catastrophic event, the collapse may have resulted from several interconnected crises unfolding simultaneously. The archives themselves preserve hints of these mounting pressures. Administrative documents reveal shortages of certain materials. Diplomatic correspondence reflects increasing urgency. Military concerns appear more frequently than in earlier periods. Yet, the surviving records stop abruptly. Conversations remain unfinished. Deliveries never arrived. Orders were left unfulfilled. The final pages of Ugarit's history simply end. This silence has fascinated historians for decades. Did scribes flee before the city burned? Were they still attempting to organize defenses as enemy forces approached? Did ordinary citizens understand that they were witnessing the end of an entire age? The tablets cannot answer these questions directly, but they preserve the atmosphere of uncertainty with remarkable immediacy. Another intriguing mystery concerns the organization of the archives themselves. Different collections were discovered in separate buildings, including the royal palace, private residences, and temple complexes. Some belong to official government administration, while others appear to have been maintained by individual scribal families. This suggests a highly educated society in which literacy extended beyond a small royal bureaucracy. How extensive was this intellectual community? The evidence points toward professional schools where scribes mastered multiple languages and writing systems. Tablets appear in Ugaritic, Akkadian, Hurrian, Sumerian, and other languages, demonstrating extraordinary scholarly achievement. A single scribe may have needed to read diplomatic correspondence in one language, compose legal contracts in another, and preserve religious literature in yet another. Few societies of the Bronze Age display such remarkable linguistic diversity. The archives also illuminate the complexity of international diplomacy. Letters exchanged between rulers reveal a world bound together by treaties, marriage alliances, trade agreements, and mutual obligations. Kings addressed one another as brothers, negotiated shipments of valuable resources, requested military assistance, and exchanged gifts intended to reinforce political relationships. Far from existing in isolation, Ugarit occupied a central position within an interconnected international system stretching from the Aegean to Mesopotamia. Its destruction therefore represented more than the fall of a single city. It marked the collapse of one vital link within a network that had connected civilizations for centuries. Beyond mainstream scholarship, the royal archives have inspired broader speculation. Because many tablets remain fragmentary, researchers continue attempting to reconstruct missing sections through advanced imaging techniques and digital analysis. Some believe unopened excavation areas may still conceal additional archives capable of expanding the known corpus significantly. Others wonder whether libraries belonging to priests, merchants, or foreign diplomats remain buried elsewhere beneath Ras Shamra.